Chapter 71. The competition between Su Li and Lecturer Chui has disturbed the environment of the school. Now Lecturer Chui and Su Li are ordered to go home to recuperate and wait for the result. Just go home to recuperate. Mei Ruhan and Gua breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. It seems that the headmaster of the school has some backbone. Otherwise, according to the Yang family's attitude, you must be driven out. After Su Li finished reading, the manservant immediately said, "The headmaster has ordered that in order to prevent the Yang family from making trouble, a carriage will be arranged to escort you all the way home tonight." Su Li nodded gently and said with a smile, "The headmaster is really considerate." Su Li is very grateful. The manservant's cheeks were slightly red and he scratched his head. Miss Su was really beautiful when she smiled. Unfortunately, such a talented and beautiful woman was coveted by a villain. That night, Su Li only said goodbye to Mei Ruhan and Gua. Then she left with the dictionary of Dahan at night. The carriage moved very slowly at night. Su Li didn't return to the byway building until the morning. Mammy Li was cleaning the room for Su Li. Although Su Li was not here, she would feel uncomfortable if she didn't clean the room for a day. Suddenly, Mammy Li heard a familiar footstep behind her. She was stunned and turned around. When she saw Su Li, she immediately put down the broom in her hand and came forward with surprise. "Miss, why do you come back so soon? How about the Muyang girls' school? Have you been wronged? You can take me there next time." Su Li didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Mammy Li's series of questions. She stepped over Mammy Li and sat down to pour herself a cup of tea. She said, "Mammy, I won't go to the school for the time being. If you want to go, you have to ask Zipei." Mammy Li's face changed slightly and she said nervously, "What's wrong? What happened?" "Yes, I remember that when you left last time, you said that the Muyang girls' school was very busy at the beginning. Later, you had time to come back to see the byway building. Why did you come back after only 3 or 4 days?" Su Li shook her head and said nothing. It was complicated and couldn't be explained clearly in a few words. Soon, the news of Su Li's return was known by the people of the byway building. Although everyone didn't understand why Su Li came back so soon, they were very happy. Without Su Li, the byway building seemed to have no backbone. Although it could still operate normally, they always felt uncomfortable. "Miss, I have something to tell you." When Su Li was about to deal with the orders of the precious beggar's chicken accumulated in the byway building, he sure stood up at this time and wanted to say something. There was a hint of guilt in his expression. Su Li slightly twisted her eyes and said nothing. She turned around and walked to the empty balcony of the attic. Looking at Su Li's back, he sure sighed deeply and walked up with heavy steps. Before Su Li responded, she heard a plop sound behind her. She turned around in shock and found that he sure was kneeling in front of her. "Miss, I'm sorry." He sure's tiger-like eyes flashed with tears, and he sighed, "The Su family knows that I can cook the precious beggar's chicken. They asked me to be responsible for making the precious beggar's chicken and gave me an extra 10 taels of silver every month." Su Li looked at he sure expressionlessly. "So you agreed?" He sure's breathing stagnated for a moment, and he said with difficulty, "I really don't want to agree. I still have a wife and a child. The whole family depends on me to survive." The old lady of the Su family said that if I didn't agree, she would report it to the government and say that I stole the recipes of the Su family and put me in prison. How dare I, a civilian, fight with the Su family? When he sure said these words, he immediately felt a lot more relaxed. "Miss, you can be considered as half a master to me. I said these words, not to ask for your forgiveness, but because I feel sorry and don't know how to help you. I'm really useless." A man in his 30s knelt in front of a 15-year-old girl and cried worse than a child. Su Li sighed softly, "Tell me how you were exposed." He sure stopped crying and intermittently told the ins and outs of the story. It turned out that during the days when Su Li was away, the order of the precious beggar's chicken was very urgent. Su Chui came to the byway building almost every day and pretended that the byway building would go out of business if it couldn't make the precious beggar's chicken. Then she took the chief chefs of the byway building and said how much she loved Su Li over and over again to refresh the good impression of the chief chefs. After 2 or 3 times, he sure was hooked as expected. Until he made the precious beggar's chicken mem. Su Chui suddenly changed her face, and he knew that he was cheated. Su Li had a conclusion in her heart. Su Chui's plan was one ring after another, and it was only aimed at her. He sure was just a poor person who was implicated by her. Miss Bad News. The old lady came here with many mammies. Mammy Li went to the attic in a panic. When she saw He Sure kneeling in front of Su Li, she was confused and at a loss. He Sure immediately wiped his tears and stood up. Su Li's eyes flashed and she went downstairs first. At this moment, it was dinner time, and the first floor was full of guests. It was very lively. Su Chui saw that Su Li came back, and she immediately felt happy. But she pretended to be angry and shouted, "You are an unfilial granddaughter. I am so angry." As she said, she walked to Su Li with a crutch and slapped her. Slap. A red palm print immediately appeared on Su Li's right face. She didn't hide, and she couldn't hide. The crisp sound resounded through the lobby. All the guests who were still eating immediately stopped and looked at her. What happened? That seems to be the old lady of the Su family. She actually slapped Miss Su Li? Miss Su Li's face is swollen. She is so cruel. When Su Chui heard the conversation of the guests around her, she immediately grasped her heart and said angrily, "I worked hard to find a way to send you to the Muyang girls' school. But you were directly dropped out of school in less than 5 days. What a scandal! What a scandal!" Su Chui waved her hand painfully and said, "It's okay that you are arrogant because of your little cooking skills at home. But you don't know how to restrain yourself in the Muyang girls' school. You have lost the face of our Su family. Get out. There is no daughter like you in the Su family." As soon as Su Chui finished her words, a group of old mammies immediately acted and skillfully threw all the things in Su Li's room outside the gate of the Baiwei building. More and more people gathered in front of the Baiwei building and pointed at Su Li. Mammy Li stood aside. She felt wronged and distressed. She shed tears. Why was the life of the miss so bitter? Su Li looked indifferent. She walked to the front of the Baiwei building and squatted down to clean up. She turned over a piece of cloth and a large number of unsightly and gaudy clothes rolled out. The onlookers snorted secretly and shyly turned their heads away. Su Li squinted her eyes and looked up to see Su Chui's undisguised complacency. It was Zi Pei who came up with this trick. She was very satisfied. What are these? Mammy Li was scared out of her wits when she saw those ragged belly bands. She ran to wrap them up and said, "These are not our missus. It must be slander. It's her. It's all her doing. She has been displeased with the miss for a long time." Mammy Li pointed at Su Chui and desperately defended. But it made the onlookers more disappointed and despised Su Li. The old lady of the Su family was highly respected. If Su Li's mammy wanted to clear the suspicion of her miss, she had to find a suitable target. "Why don't you believe it? Why don't you believe it?" Mammy Li burst into tears and almost went crazy. She said, "You don't know how much my miss has suffered and how she is in the Su family. But you all put on such a face. You are all villains." Everyone claimed to be righteous. Mammy Li's words immediately made many people angry. "What? You have done it. Why don't you allow me to say it?" "Tut, I didn't expect that Miss Su Li is so unbearable. Bah, I misjudged you. I thought you were a good match for me. But I didn't expect that you are a slut who has been raped by thousands of men. You are pretending to be virtuous. It's disgusting." The malice was fermenting. The onlookers surrounded Su Li and said more vicious words. For a time, the Baiwei building became a denunciation meeting for Su Li. Crack! A rotten egg hit Su Li's head. The egg yolk flowed down along her hair, which immediately made Su Li stink. "It's disgusting to pretend now. I will smash you to death. I also have some leftovers. Let's throw them together." "Throw her to death." Su Li bowed her head and packed her luggage. She didn't avoid them and had nowhere to avoid them. Soon she was covered with leftovers and smelled worse than beggars. Mammy Li stood in front of Su Li, but she couldn't stop them. She cried so much that her eyes were blurred. But she didn't see that Su Li bowed her head and didn't shed a drop of tears. Suddenly, a huge stone flew from the crowd. Mammy Li's eyes widened, but she couldn't stop it. She watched it hit Su Li's forehead. Blood immediately flowed down her cheeks. Seeing the blood, everyone's high-spirited mood was extinguished by ice water. Then they found that they had done too much. But now they wouldn't admit their mistakes. They just restrained themselves a little and stopped throwing things. Su Li's eyes were soon stained with blood. She touched her forehead. There was blood on her hand. Then she smiled wildly. That was good. That was interesting. Su Chui was as powerful as in the previous life. If she didn't get some stimulation, she would almost forget that she didn't come to find Ling Li in this life, but revenge. Crazy revenge. Clatter. It suddenly rained heavily. The raindrops fell on the ground and made a sound. The crowd suddenly dispersed. Only Ma'am Su Chui was still watching the show in the Baiwei building. When she saw Su Li and Mammy Li gradually disappeared in the Desu town with wet packages, she finally couldn't help laughing happily. Wicked girl, no matter how brilliant you are this year, you still become a stray dog in my hands. In the dense forest, the bean-sized jade beads slapped on the leaves and made a bang-bang sound. Mammy Li was almost unable to open her eyes because of the rain. She carried the heavy wet quilt and asked loudly in the rain, "Miss, where are we going now? There is no shabby temple nearby for us to rest temporarily." The wound on Su Li's forehead had been washed by the rain and no blood could be seen. She turned her head and said, "Mammy, throw away the quilt. We can walk faster." Mammy Li opened her eyes widely. What did she see? Miss was smiling. And she smiled sweetly. No. Is Miss too stimulated and a little confused? Mammy Li grasped the quilt in her hand more tightly. She pursed her lips and couldn't help crying. She wouldn't let Miss die halfway like what she did in the past. What are you thinking about? You look as if I'm dying. Su Li's peaceful words suddenly sounded beside Mammy. Mammy Li raised her head in amazement. She suddenly felt that the quilt in her hand had been thrown directly into the roadside ditch by Su Li. Chapter 72. Suddenly, a hand firmly grasped Mammy Li's clothes from behind. Mammy Li struggled for a long time but couldn't get down. She looked back and saw Su Li pointing to the valley not far away. "We can sleep there." In the valley, Mammy Li followed Su Li to look around curiously. She didn't expect that the valley, which looked like a barren mountain on the surface, had a different world inside. How did the miss know this place? Thinking of this, Mammy Li was worried again. The exquisite bamboo buildings of these courtyards were no worse than those of the Jinyuan court. She knew that the owner of this place must have an extraordinary background. She didn't know whether the owner would let them live there. At this time, Feng Yuan came out of the bamboo building and saw Su Li. His expression suddenly changed. He quickly walked to her and asked in a deep voice, "What happened? How did you become like this?" Mammy Li looked at Feng Yuan and was confused. Wasn't this the work of the Baiwei building? What happened? Was it a master of a family who hid in the work and deliberately approached the miss? Su Li didn't answer and shook her head. "Call Qingning and others here. I will take a bath first. I have something to say later." But Feng Yuan glanced at Mammy Li and didn't ask anything. He turned around and ran to the yard. Mammy Li heard the conversation between them and was more confused. Why did Feng Yuan still respect the miss? "Wow, Sister Li, you are back. Why are you wet all over? I will fetch the bath water for you." Feng Ling came over and screamed when she saw Su Li. She didn't care about the dirt and ran to the bamboo building with Su Li. After a while, Mammy Li sat in the bathtub and watched Feng Ling busy in the kitchen. Feng Ling originally wanted her to go to the bamboo building to take a bath with Su Li, but Mammy Li didn't dare to agree. She moved the bathtub to the kitchen and locked the door. "This miss." Mammy Li thought for a long time and said, "May I ask where this place is and how you know my miss?" Feng Ling said without turning her head, "Mammy, you have so many questions. Didn't Sister Li tell you before? But since Sister Li brought you here, she certainly didn't intend to hide it from you. I will be merciful and tell you. All the houses here belong to Sister Li." Mammy Lee was dumbfounded. This valley yard was actually the Mrs.? When exactly did it happen? She had been serving the young miss all this time, but she didn't know. Naturally, Mammy Lee thought of Sue Lee's wisdom and mystery from time to time. She was stunned for a long time and suddenly sighed. She should have thought of it. On the second floor of the bamboo building, Sue Lee took a bath and put on a clean dress. Then she slightly cleaned the wound on her forehead. Soon, the scar could not be seen. The palm print on her face had long since faded away. In fact, with her current cultivation of Xiantian first stage, she could completely avoid all the injuries she had suffered during the day, but she didn't avoid any of them. Looking at the still immature face in the mirror, Sue Lee was stunned for a moment. Then she opened the door of the bamboo building and left. At this moment, in the yard, Fang Yuan, Chu Qingning and others were all present. Sue Lee glanced at them and sat at the head of the table. "Is your forehead okay?" With Fang Yuan's eyesight, he could see that Sue Lee's forehead was injured. Sue Lee shook her head and then briefly told them what happened in the school. Chu Qingning and Haydn gnashed their teeth and couldn't wait to beat the Yang family and Mam Su Chui to death. Fang Yuan stared at Sue Lee, and there seemed to be two clusters of small flames in his eyes. He was silent for a moment and asked, "What are you going to do?" "I tell you this, but I don't want you to deal with them directly." Sue Lee shook her head and said, "In the next few days, Haydn and you have to work hard. As for you, Fang Yuan." Sue Lee pondered for a moment and took out a jade token and put it in his hand. "Help me to check the details of the Yang family." Fang Yuan clenched the wooden token and nodded calmly. "I will set off immediately." "What about me? What about me?" Chu Qingning saw that even his younger brother had a task, so he couldn't help but ask immediately, "What can I do?" Sue Lee tilted her head and thought for a moment. "You, look after the house." Chu Qingning looked bitter and immediately said to Haydn fiercely, "You look after the house. I will disguise myself and go out to inquire about the news." "But why?" Haydn was suddenly unhappy and felt wronged. "Because I am your eldest brother." "Ugh. Eldest brother, don't hit me. I know I am wrong." The next day, the sky was cloudless and clear. Early in the morning, Chu Qingning took his younger brothers to inquire about the news in the town, while Sue Lee practiced in the bamboo building at ease. In the previous life, she had learned a lot of martial arts. In the inborn realm, she was only good at archery, swordsmanship, and poison. Now those insights were still there, but she needed to familiarize herself with them. There was no sword or bow in the valley. Sue Lee used a branch as a sword, which could play a familiar role. After dark, Chu Qingning and others came back one after another, and their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. They went to the Desa town and knew how much grievance Sue Lee had suffered. They were so angry that their eyes were red and they couldn't wait to tear down the Baiwei building directly. Sue Lee worked hard to support the Baiwei building. When the Baiwei building became a cash cow, the Su family burned the bridge after crossing the river. They directly slandered Sue Lee and drove her out of the Su family. They didn't even leave her a place to sleep. If Sue Lee didn't say not to hurt the people of the Su family, he really wanted to poison all of them with the poisonous heart-biting insect. Sue Lee didn't ask them. She couldn't see the whole picture in one day. She had to wait. On the fifth day, Sue Lee finally appeared in the yard. Chu Qingning, who had been holding back for a long time, said with his saliva flying and teeth gnashing. He was really angry. Sue Lee was very calm after hearing it. She was not surprised at all. Sure enough, after the news that Sue Lee was driven out of the Su family came out, many people in the Desa town were suspicious. But then the Su family spread the news that Sue Lee was driven out of the Muyang girls' school because of her bad conduct, which made the Su family suffer unprecedented shame. In the past few days, the old lady of the Su family personally helped to manage the Baiwei building. Then she found that Sue Lee embezzled a lot of money and had an unclear relationship with many childs in private. Sue Lee's biological mother, Mrs. Zhu, was so angry that she directly passed out, which almost affected the fetus in her belly. Such a one-sided statement had caused many ignorant commoners to fall for it. But there were still many people who didn't believe it, especially Mr. Zhou and others who had tasted Sue Lee's craftsmanship. This was only the one-sided statement of the Su family. Now Sue Lee was driven out and disappeared, so it was impossible to confront it. Some people said that Su Li was guilty and didn't dare to show up. At that time, the old lady of the Su family slapped her, and many people saw it. If she didn't have a guilty conscience, she should hide. Mr. Zhou's prestige was extremely high, and his personal insistence also made many people skeptical. But then the Su family released another news that the precious beggar's chicken was not researched by Su Li at all, but the chef of the Baiwei building. He sure taught Su Li how to cook, but he was shamelessly robbed by Su Li in the end. Hearing the news, Mr. Zhou was also shocked and hurried to seek confirmation. Under the coercion of the Su family, he sure cooked a precious beggar's chicken. It seemed that he acquiesced to the fact, as the Su family said. Mr. Zhou still had a lot of doubts in his heart, but his belief was shaken after all, and he no longer stood up to speak for Su Li. With the fall of Mr. Zhou, Su Li's notoriety and beauty reputation were spread in the entire Desu town. The little fairy that everyone in the Desu town praised, worshipped and yearned for in the past immediately became a heinous, unfilial and slutty woman. Oh! Chu Qingning took a sip of tea and said angrily, "My dear, I have said so much. Can you give me some reaction? They are talking about you. Aren't you angry at all?" "I am very angry," Su Li said lightly, "so I want to raise the price. How many seasoning raw materials are there in the warehouse?" Chu Qingning's eyes immediately brightened. "A lot, at least 100 kilograms. Originally, you sold it for 1,000 taels per kilogram, and you can almost earn 200,000 taels. "Oh," Su Li said, "then let's raise it to 2,000. Chu Qingning frowned when he heard the words. "I'm afraid that's not possible, although the price has doubled. If you offer 50 kilograms at a time, they can also offer 100,000 taels. You can't cause them trouble at all." "Who said that I only sell 50 kilograms? Su Li raised her eyebrows when she heard the words, "Go with me tonight." "Can I go with you?" Chu Qingning's eyes widened. It had always been a secret how Su Li sold the seasoning raw materials to the Su family. They consciously didn't ask more. They didn't expect that Su Li would ask him to go with her today. After a few days, Su Li's reputation in the Desu town was so bad that even Mei Ruhan in the Muyang girls' school heard about it. She could do nothing but silently pray for Su Li's safety. When Su Zipei heard that Su Li had been successfully driven away by her grandma, she could wake up with a smile every day. After so many failures, she finally drove Su Li away before Su Qingtan came back. It was really a blessing. When Ning Yunji heard the news, he was so angry that his beard almost curled up. As the nominal senior fellow apprentice, if he didn't do something, he would be too ashamed to see Qishir when he came back. On this day, the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Two figures, one tall and one short, stood beside the Sanhe bridge. Chu Qingning was disguised by Su Li with potion, and then he took a poison to become fat. He completely changed from a handsome boy to a short, fat, and ugly man. Su Li's poisons are really endless. I hope this medicine doesn't have any side effects. Chu Qingning touched his round belly and was full of regret. If he knew it, he wouldn't come with Su Li. Time passed slowly. Suddenly, Su Li's cold eyes flashed. She saw two figures slowly appear on the other side of the Sanhe bridge. They were Li Yin and Su Huanli, who hadn't seen each other for a long time. Su Huanli's face was glowing. It was unknown what happy event happened recently. He took out the bank note from his arms without hesitation and said, "I have prepared 50,000 taels." Li Yin stood aside silently as a guard. When he saw the extra person on the opposite side, he suddenly had an ominous premonition. He was afraid that this transaction would not be as smooth as the previous 3 times. 50,000 taels? Su Li sneered in a hoarse voice. Her eyes were like a cold snake. What your Su family has done recently is really disgusting. Su Huanli's expression changed slightly and he scolded coldly, "Your Excellency, don't slander us. Our Su family is upright and upright. When did we do disgusting things? Besides, it's not your turn to care about the affairs of our Su family." The middle-aged man that Su Li pretended to be heard a very funny joke. He laughed and bent down. His hoarse and unpleasant voice echoed in the night sky like a crow. You have done it but you don't let others say it? You are really cheeky. Su Li counted her fingers and said, "Let me count." Your old man bribed ma'am Yang Shui to make things difficult for Su Li. No matter whether she succeeds or not, she will be driven out of the Muyang girls' school in the end. Then, when Su Li comes back, you will put on a play in the Baiwei building. You will hide those things in Su Li's luggage and deliberately expose them in front of everyone to establish Su Li's bad reputation. In the past few days, you have spent a lot of money to bribe the punks in the Tongnan Street to spread rumors everywhere. The effect is really good. Su Huanli's face, which was thicker than the city wall, was full of horror at the moment. It seemed that he was stripped of all his clothes and was seen naked. Li Yin's expression changed dramatically and he couldn't help but ask, "Your Excellency, you should be responsible for what you said. Is what you said true or false?" Su Li picked her nails and looked slightly annoyed. She said impatiently, "Do I have the leisure to tell you stories? You are the housekeeper of the Su house, but you don't even know these. You are so stupid. Don't listen to him. What he said is false." Su Huanli woke up and immediately denied crazily. But he found that the latter took 2 steps back and looked at him in a strange way. Chapter 73. Deal? Su Huanli was vigilant and said, "Apart from this, what else can I do for you?" "Yes, nothing else." Su Li laughed unscrupulously and said, "So, I decide to raise the price." "Raise it again?" Su Huanli screamed. The price was raised from 800 taels to 1,000 taels when they met for the first time. How much would it be raised this time? 1,200? 2,000 taels. Su Li said it lightly, but Su Huanli was so scared that his heart stopped and his face turned pale. He said, "It's impossible. I can't get 100,000 taels now. I respect you as a man with extraordinary abilities in Jianghu. Don't go too far." "Respect me?" Su Li leaned forward and sneered, "Head of the Su family, sometimes you have to think before you speak. I took your Su family's things and sold them back to your Su family. If you had the ability, you would have killed me long ago. Do you think that I will be kind enough to lower the price if you say some polite words?" Su Huanli held his breath and couldn't say a word. "You said that I went too far?" Su Li stood up straight and put her hands on her chest. She said arrogantly, "Yes, I did. Your Su family bullied a little girl with your power. We are just jackals of the same lair. Don't think each other dirty." Su Huanli was so angry that he had an asthma attack. He said the word "you" several times but didn't say a complete sentence. Su Chui just took control of the Baiwei building and were ready to increase the sales of the beggar's chicken by relying on the Yang family. If there was no seasoning, this way would be blocked and even arouse the anger of the Yang family. The consequences would be unimaginable. Taking a deep breath, Su Huanli softened and said, "Well, I will buy 25 caddies first. Give me 3 days to collect the remaining 50,000 taels and then I will trade with you." Then he handed out 50,000 taels again and pinned it behind him. He clenched it so hard that it almost bled. With the current traffic of the Baiwei building, 25 caddies of raw materials could only support them for half a month. Within half a month he must find a substitute for the seasoning. Otherwise, almost 80% of the money earned by the Baiwei building would be given to the mysterious person. How could he be willing? Su Li reached out to take the banknote and put it in her arms. Chu Qingning looked at it and touched his belly, feeling doubtful. Although they angered Su Huanli, in fact, they didn't hurt the Su family at all. What was the point of doing so? But at this time, Su Li put away the notes and turned away. Su Huanli was immediately dumbfounded and hurriedly stopped her. "Wait! Did you forget to give me the raw materials?" "Oh, I forgot." Su Li turned around and said with a smile, "Look at me. I almost forgot to tell you. I still have the last 200 caddies of raw materials here, enough for your Su family to use until the new raw materials are planted next year. Either you buy all of them, or you don't even have to think about buying a single gene." "Impossible!" Su Huanli was shocked and said, 100 kilograms, that is 400,000 taels of silver. How can I have so much silver?" "That's your business. I don't care." Su Li smiled sinisterly. Didn't I say that I will discuss a new deal with the head of the Su family? If you don't come at midnight 3 days later, I will feed all the raw materials to the pigs. Don't blame me for being merciless. Then, Su Li raised the notes of 50,000 taels of silver in her hand and said, "This is the storage fee. I will help you keep the raw materials well in 3 days." Su Huanli stared at Su Li's face and trembled with anger. Suddenly, he turned his eyes and fainted because of anger. "Master!" Li Yin exclaimed and hurriedly held Su Huanli. Su Li was expressionless and turned away. Back to the valley, Chu Qingning took the antidote to restore his original appearance. He didn't know what to say. He walked around with Su Li and finally let out a long sigh. "Su Li, I used to think that my acting skills were very good. Today I see you. I really admit my defeat. Even if those people in Jianghu come in person, they can't act better than you." Su Li removed the disguise and glanced at Chu Qingning. "Are you praising me or insulting me? My father made me unhappy. Of course, I will make him more unhappy." "But," Chu Qingning scratched his head and said, "Does your Su family really have so much money? If not, do we really have to lose all the raw materials?" "No." Su Li's eyes flashed with inexplicable wisdom. "As long as my grandma has a little brain, she will never allow that kind of thing to happen." "What? Ma'am?" Su Chui slammed her crutch so hard that the ground trembled slightly. She pointed at Su Huanli, who was at a loss, and said, "You were extorted 200,000 taels of silver for nothing. You are such an evil son. Do you want to piss your mother off?" "Mother, I have no other way." Su Huanli explained the ins and outs clearly. "The mysterious man is holding the lifeline of the Baiwei building. If I don't give him the money, the good situation of the Baiwei building will immediately collapse." Speaking of this, Su Huanli said with a bitter face, "Although the profit of the Baiwei building in these months is very good, it is only 210,000 taels. Plus the business of the silk shop and the circulating funds of the family, a total of 300,000 taels of silver can be collected. There is a vacancy of 100,000 taels of silver, mother." Looking at Su Huanli's eager eyes, "Ma'am." Su Chui snorted and said, "Do you think it is so easy to bribe the Muyang girls' school? In order to bribe the Yang family, I spent more than 100,000 taels of silver. Now there are only 50,000 taels of silver left." Su Huanli was instantly dumbfounded and said, "There are still 50,000 taels of silver. What should we do?" Li Yin stood at the door and heard every word in the room. He also saved a sum of money in the past decades, which was enough to make up for the vacancy. However, he closed his eyes and stood still. He didn't mean to go in. The Baiwei building was the painstaking efforts of the Second Mississippi. Since the mother and son destroyed the bridge after crossing the river and drove the Second Miss away, there was no need for the beggar's chicken in the Baiwei building. There was no need for the beggar's chickens in the Baiwei building to exist. It was good to let the mysterious man feed the pigs. Su Chui and Su Huanli discussed for a long time, but they couldn't make up for the rest of the money. The whole Su family was almost emptied. 350,000 taels of silver was the limit. In the Jinyuan court, Zhu Yan was basking in the sun in the yard. Suddenly she heard something. She sat up and saw Su Huanli coming from the door. "Master, why are you here?" Zhu Yan was surprised and said, "Zipe, pour tea for your father." Before Su Zipe picked up the teapot, Su Huanli had waved his hand to stop her. "Madam, I come to ask for help this time. Can you borrow 50,000 taels of silver from your mother's family?" "1 month. I can pay it back in 1 month." Zhu Yan was embarrassed when she heard that. She didn't know how much money she had taken from her mother's family over the years. Now when she returned to her mother's family, even her parents would drive her out. How could she borrow a penny? "Master, it's not that I don't want to help you, but I really..." Seeing Zhu Yan's expression, Su Huanli, who had been suppressed by anger, suddenly burst out. He snorted coldly and said, "Usually, you don't hesitate to take money from the accounting room. When the family is in trouble, you don't give me a penny. You are really a good wife." Zhu Yan seemed to be hit by a heavy hammer in her heart. She was so angry that she burst into tears. She said, "Master, how can you say that? If I have a penny, I will give it to you." But I have helped my mother a lot before, and there is no money left. You complain like this. What do you think of me? Su Huanli woke up and regained his reason. Seeing that Zhu Yan began to cry again, and the 50,000 taels of silver had not been realized, he felt bored for no reason. He flung his sleeves and left the Jinyuan court without saying a word of comfort. Zhu Yan looked at the empty door stupidly, and tears fell from her face. She pretended to cry before, but now she really cried. Mother, don't cry. You will suffer if the fetus is affected. Su Zipei came to comfort her in a hurry. Zhu Yan covered her belly and slowly leaned on the pillow of the rattan chair. She said in a faint voice, "Your mother entrusted the wrong person. Zipei, you must rely on that to recognize the ancestors and return to the family so that your mother can live a good life. Do you know?" Su Zipei bit her lips and said, "I will not let you down." For a whole day, Su Huanli was busy with money. The Zhu family had no chance. He went to visit the Yang family, but he was directly rejected. Because of Su Yuezhu, the Yang family had no contact with the Su family. Su Huanli also heard that the Yang family seemed to want to divorce his wife. Su Huanli was so anxious that he had no time to care about Su Yuezhu's life or death. He immediately went to the Wantong Native Bank. But when the Wantong Native Bank heard that Su Huanli suddenly wanted to borrow 50,000 taels of silver, it immediately felt that something was wrong. Because the Su family should be rich now. For the sake of prudence, the shopkeeper of the native bank offered 10% interest per day. 50,000 taels of silver rolled interest in a month. Su Huanli had to exchange hundreds of thousands of taels of silver for the native bank. How could he accept it? He had to go home. It seems that I can only do that. Su Huanli was a little distressed. He immediately called Li Yin and gave detailed instructions. At night, Fang Yuan returned to the yard in the valley. After seeing Su Li, he handed the investigation files to Su Li without saying anything. It turned out that the Chui family, where Mam Su Chui came from, was not an ordinary family. In the early years, it was a rich and powerful family in the Qinghe province. But later, it offended a noble and was forced to disband. Because Mam Su Chui had always been in the Su family, she was not affected. She also held 5 shops in the Qinghe province. This time, the Yang family was willing to help. In addition to the business of the Baiwei building, Su Chui also promised to give the Yang family 2 shops in the Qinghe province. Even if the 2 shops were not used by the Yang family, it was very cost-effective to rent them out. The Yang family was concerned about the interests and Yang Chui helped to promote the cooperation between the 2 families. Su Li was easily kicked out. Although on the surface, Su Li did not take a penny at all. The current circulating capital of the Su family is also estimated by the Tianya house. Fang Yuan learned Su Li's plan from Chu Qingning and immediately said, "If we don't sell 1 or 2 shops in the Qinghe province, we can't get 400,000 taels." Su Li pushed away the files and looked at Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning with her chin on her hand. She said with a smile, "In this way, we will soon have the first or even the second shop. Which one of you will go to the Qinghe province?" "I will go." Chu Qingning raised his eyebrows and boasted, "Su Li, you have to believe my acting skills. They are excellent." Su Li smiled more and nodded slightly without saying anything. Seeing this, Fang Yuan couldn't help but smile gently. She was still herself and was not affected by the gossip at all. That night, Su Li disguised Chu Qingning and Chu Qingning rushed to the Qinghe province overnight. On the next day it was dawn. In the center of the Qinghe province, the streets of the Qinghe town were already crowded with vehicles. From time to time, people could see a carriage with ancient decorations passing by. The location of the Chui family's shop could only be regarded as medium, but the land was not cheap. If it was sold at the original price, it would cost 70,000 or 80,000 taels. At this moment, a shop of the Chui family had been emptied. Su Huanli only felt that every minute and every second was torturous. Although it was winter, his clothes were almost soaked with sweat. Tomorrow was the 3rd day. If he couldn't transfer the shop before that, the Baiwei building would be finished. He specially went to the Tianya house to estimate the price of the shop. The land was worth 80,000 taels. He gritted his teeth and directly cut off 30,000 taels and sold it at 50,000 taels. As expected, many people came to inquire in detail. But when they heard that the delivery would be finished in 2 days, the group of businessmen hesitated for fear of fraud. There were many cheats nowadays. They had to investigate clearly before they dared to take action. Chapter 74. After waiting for a whole day, no one came to ask about the price. Su Huanli was so worried that he almost pulled out his hair. As the sun went down, Qinghe province was also busy. However, there were fewer pedestrians on the street where Su Huanli was. Occasionally he saw 1 or 2 pedestrians passing by. Gradually, the moon rose to the middle of the sky. The whole Qinghe province was quiet. People were asleep, but the oil lamps in the shops were still on. "Master, it's late." Li Yin tidied up the temporary bed and couldn't help but remind him. Su Huanli sat at the door, still unmoved. The sun of the 3rd day gradually rose. Su Huanli's eyes were bloodshot. He stared at the pedestrians outside the door. His expression was like that of an evil ghost, almost choosing people to eat. Old Li reduced the price. Reduce it to 40,000 or 50,000 taels. I don't believe that no one wants such a good shop. Su Huanli squeezed a few words from his teeth. Li Yin shook his head, took off the paper pasted on the door, changed the price, and pasted it again. But still, no one came to ask. Seeing that it was going to be noon, Su Huanli's heart was completely cold. When he thought that the Baiwei building, which earned hundreds of thousands of taels a month, was about to collapse, his heart was bleeding. At this moment, Chu Qingning appeared in front of the shop. He looked at the price posted in front of the shop, smiled and walked into the shop. As soon as he appeared, he immediately attracted Su Huanli's attention. The more he looked at him, the more shocked he was. This person was obviously a young man and wore the servant style, but his clothes were made of good satin. Moreover, the faint aura of wealth made Su Huanli immediately guess that this young man must be a servant with a high status in a big family. "May I ask, are you interested in the shop?" Su Huanli laughed and wanted to ask with a fist and palm salute. Chu Qingning smiled bitterly and said, "Master, don't make fun of me. However, my master is a little interested in it." Su Huanli's guess came true. He was more excited and said repeatedly, "Little brother, your master really has a good eye. If it weren't for the urgent need of money at home, I wouldn't sell such a good shop at a low price. The house has just been built for a few years." Before Su Huanli finished his words, Chu Qingning frowned and interrupted, "Master, don't make a mistake. If our family's young master buys the land, he will definitely tear down the house and rebuild it. You should talk about something else." Su Huanli's smile was slightly stiff, and he immediately changed his words. That's right. How about I bring you to have a look at the land?" Chu Qingning nodded and then strolled slowly in the shop. Although Su Huanli was anxious, he did not dare to urge Chu Qingning for fear of scaring him away. Chu Qingning looked at Su Huanli with a cold sweat and laughed in his heart. After walking for a while, when the sun was about to set, he stopped and pointed to the shop next to him. "Whose shop is that?" "It's also mine." Su Huanli replied quickly, "That shop is a little small and no one rents it. This shop originally had a tenant, but because of urgent family matters, I paid him a sum of money and moved him away." "I see." Chu Qingning picked his nails and looked a little dissatisfied. "To be honest, your land is a little smaller than my master thought, but my master is not short of money. I'm going to buy both of your shops. The price is 50,000 yuan. What do you think?" "Only 50,000 yuan for 2 shops." Su Huanli almost scolded. What was the difference between this and robbing? "What's wrong? It seems that you are not willing to." "Forget it," Chu Qingning said and walked away without any reluctance. At the moment when he stepped aside, the twilight shone on Su Huanli's face, which immediately made Su Huanli completely sober. "Little brother, please wait." Just in the 2 days when Su Huanli left, there were new changes in the Desa town. It turned out that the headmaster of the Muyang school personally sent someone to put a letter on the official notice board of the Desa town, which told the general thing about Su Li in the Muyang girls' school. On the surface, Su Li just returned to the town to rest temporarily. It was not as the Su family said, that she was driven out of the Su family because of her bad conduct. This notice suddenly shocked the people in the whole town. The Su family's face had been slapped resoundingly. Why did the Su family say that Su Li was so unbearable? Do you still remember that the mammy of Miss Su said that it was all framed by the old lady of the Su family? In the past, Miss Su was in charge of the Byway building. Maybe the old lady of the Su family was really jealous, so she tried to kick Miss Su out of the Su family. Old bastard! He even came up with such a vicious plan to force Miss Su Li to leave. Now there is no news about her. Is it possible that Miss Su Li has been killed by the old lady? I still remember that Miss Su Li was also driven out of the Su family a year ago. It seems that the Su family is very dirty. The people who were deceived were angry. In less than one day, several versions were fabricated. For a time, the Su family became a bully family that everyone had the right to punish. Su Chui was so angry that she almost went to see the king of hell. She didn't expect that the people of the Muyang girls' school were so unappreciative. What on earth did the Yang family do? Mother, what should we do now? Zhu Yan hurriedly asked. I heard that the Byway building is now deserted. Everyone says that the Su family has a bad character. No matter how delicious the food in the Byway building is, they will not go there. Ning Yunji, the old and pedantic scholar. Ma'am. Su Chui looked resentful and said with hatred, I will settle accounts with you sooner or later. Old lady, bad news. Outside the door, an old mammy ran in panic with a lot of leaves hanging on her head. She said, the people in the Desu town are crazy. They carry the manure of each family and put it in front of the Byway building. They say that if Miss Su is not innocent, they will turn the Byway building into a manure tank. What? Ma'am. Su Chui couldn't help but show a shocked expression. She hurriedly said, these untouchables are really rebellious. Go and report it to the government. Go quickly. The old mammy rolled and crawled out of the room. After the officers and soldiers were dispatched, the riot was temporarily suppressed. But the gate of the Su family was inevitably splashed with several basins of manure. The smell was terrible. When Su Li got the news, she changed her appearance and opened the Baichao Tang. Many people were injured by the officers and soldiers. As soon as she opened the door, a group of injured people came in immediately. Dr. Xue Li, you finally opened the door. The officers and soldiers are too much. Dr. Xue Li, where have you been these days? I haven't seen the Baichao Tang open for a long time. Many old customers came over and asked. Su Li smiled slightly and kept diagnosing. She said, I went on a long trip and came back to have a look today. I also heard about the things of the Su family. I know Miss Su's character very well. But the Su family is a bit difficult to explain. Su Li said lightly and didn't talk about it in detail. Her attitude gave everyone a boost of confidence. They were more convinced that Su Li was wronged. Dr. Xue Li practices medicine to help people. She is indifferent to fame and fortune. What she said must be right. Even Dr. Xue Li said so. I believe her. I remember that Dr. Xue Li's master, Dr. Qi, once went to the Su family to be a teacher. He must know a lot about the Su family. Now Dr. Xue Li said so. It seems that the Su family is really weird. Under Su Li's encouragement, many people immediately joined the team to harass the Su family. Su Chui had no choice but to take out the last bit of money and let Li Shanbao order that anyone who made trouble would be arrested and put in jail. Then the chaos subsided. At this moment, Su Huanli came back from Qinghe province with 400,000 taels of silver. He rushed to Sanhe Bridge without stopping. He had no time to know that the Byway building was now closed. In the middle of the night, Su Li appeared on time and handed all the remaining raw materials to Su Huanli. Looking at Su Huanli's relieved expression, she suddenly let out a chuckle, and then turned into a ray of starlight and disappeared. The inborn realm. Li Yin's pupils shrank, as if he saw several horrible things. He remembered that this person was obviously in the acquired 9th hurdle a few months ago, but he broke through to the inborn realm so quickly. Could it be that this person was seriously injured and was originally in the inborn realm? Now he was treated with the money of the Su family and his injury had been improved. Li Yin's eyes flashed with deep fear. He helped Su Huanli push the cart and left quickly, as if there was a ghost chasing behind him. The inborn senior was the real supreme person in the martial arts circle. Su Li took 400,000 taels of silver back to the valley. Chu Qingning looked at the banknotes piled high on the table and almost drooled. 400,000 taels of silver. It's the first time for me to see so much money in my life. Chu Qingning couldn't help but laugh. The old guy was fooled by me and had no time to go back to the Desa town. When he knew that the Baiwei building was closed, his face must be very interesting. Su Li supported her chin and moved half of the banknotes to Chu Qingning, who was laughing. Qingning, you have to work hard next. What? Chu Qingning looked at the banknotes of 200,000 taels of silver in front of him and couldn't help but swallow. Pull down the two shops and rebuild them. Su Li said and took out a stack of drawings and put them on the table. Hire the best craftsmen and make sure to finish it in the shortest time. Chu Qingning was instantly dumbfounded. He didn't expect that his lie to trick Su Huanli to buy the two shops would come true. Fang Yuan picked up the drawings and looked at them one by one. Although he didn't understand many specific structures, he could see that the structure of these drawings was extremely extraordinary. He couldn't help but look up and ask, Su Li, did you draw all these? What else? Su Li smiled and squinted her eyes like a crescent moon. She thought in her heart, of course, what belongs to the disabled husband is mine. Fang Yuan smiled bitterly and sighed. Is there anything you can't do? He was afraid that he was not qualified to compete for such a person. Only a young master like that person had a little possibility. However, even if he just stayed with her and protected her silently, it was also a kind of happiness. Fang Yuan thought like this and smiled warmly. Let's go to have supper first. Ling is ready. Su Li put away the rest of the banknotes. The three of them and Fang Ling had a rare good mood. At the same time, Su Huanli returned home and heard the news in the Desa town. He was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground unconscious. You have insulted the elite lecturer of our school. You are so angry that you have to lie in bed for several days. Your behavior is so bad that you are the shame of Muyang, the shame of Qinghe County, the shame of Dahan Country. Therefore, the academy has decided to expel him from the academy to prove his innocence. Su Li is only 15 years old, but she is so unruly and unruly. The academy was worried that the other academies would be deceived by him, so they issued a ban on him. No school in the Qinghe province would accept Su Li as a student, in case she misleads the public and disturbs the government. In addition, Mei Ruhan of the Mei family is guilty of covering up Su Li. She is also ordered to withdraw from the school and go home to repent. If she doesn't repent, she can't return to the school. I hope the Mei family can help her to mend her ways and get rid of the influence of the evil girl as soon as possible. A piece of cold paper was poured over everyone's head like ice water. Mei Ruhan looked at the bulletin board and her tears fell down. The grievance in her heart drowned her like a tide. But it is Mrs. Yang who hurts people. Why is Su Li responsible for all the mistakes in the end? Miss Guo couldn't help crying. The miss who cooked well was not only driven out of the family but also suffered injustice. The world was too unfair. Miss, let's go. The old butler of the Mei family sighed. It was not a matter of who was right and who was wrong. The Yang family obviously wanted to establish their power by taking the little girl. The influence of the Mei family was not as good as that of the Yang family. What could they do? The news of the Muyang school soon spread to the Desa town and caused a stir. Even Ning Yunji was slandered. It was said that he had an affair with Su Li, so he tried his best to protect her. The situation in the Desa town was stirred up again. The common people only heard the hearsay. How could they know the truth behind the incident? They immediately blamed Su Li. Every day, a large group of people went to the Su house to apologize. After hearing the news that the lord of the Su family was angry, many people sent him tonics, which made Mam Su Chui very happy. The Yang family did a good job. They not only saved the situation but also made Ning Yunji shameless. It was really delightful. In the yard in the valley, Chu Qingning pushed open the door of the bamboo building with a livid face and said, "Su Li, have you heard the news?" Su Li played with the medicine bottle and said without raising her head, "Of course I have heard it." "Then why don't you give some response?" Chu Qingning was so angry that he was about to go crazy. "The Yang family is really hateful. I will reward them with 100,000 poisonous heart-biting insects." "Stand out." A cold shout made Chu Qingning stunned. It was the first time for him to hear such a cold voice from Su Li. He slowly turned around and saw Su Li's cold eyes. He couldn't help but shiver and immediately felt that he was in a world of ice and snow. "Wait." Su Li's voice was low and hoarse. "The Yang family is a little annoying. Since she was reborn, she had been enjoying the pleasure of teasing the Su family. But since the Yang family intervened, the grasshopper of the Su family seemed to climb over her head. She would feel fresh for the first time, but she was annoyed for the second time. Then what are you waiting for?" Chu Qingning was very anxious, but Su Li still shook her head. "There is no senior in the acquired realm. I can kill them all by myself." Chu Qingning was very anxious, but Su Li shook her head. "I haven't thought about how to kill them." Chu Qingning opened his mouth and didn't say a word. It turned out that Su Li meant wait. "You don't have to worry about this kind of trifle." Su Li took the branch beside the table and casually waved it in the air. "When we go to the Qinghe province and Yunjing in the future, our opponents will not be such small figures. We will even be enemies with the Yinma cult. You should be prepared." Chu Qingning was slightly stunned, and then he nodded calmly. After getting along with her for a few months, even though he knew that the girl was eccentric and ruthless, he didn't know why he seemed to be sure that as long as he followed Su Li, he would reach the top one day and see more. Perhaps only in this way could he have a glimmer of possibility to find her. Suddenly, Fong Ling and Haydn ran in a panic. Something bad happened. Sister Li, Mammy Li was arrested by the government. Su Li's eyes were fixed and she said in a low voice, "What happened?" "It's all my fault." Fong Ling lowered her head and said, "I asked Mammy Li to accompany me to buy vegetables today. Mammy Li disguised herself and thought that no one would recognize her. But she was recognized by the government and was arrested directly. Haydn and I came back as soon as we saw it." Su Li put down the branch and stood up. Then she went out without saying anything. Chu Qingning said anxiously, "Don't go out. Maybe they arrested Mammy Li for you." Su Li turned a deaf ear to it. She took a bamboo hat and disappeared in the valley in the blink of an eye. Chu Qingning was anxious and hurried to follow her. Fong Ling immediately ran to the yard to find Fong Yuan, who was practicing. When Su Li came to the town, she saw that the Baiwei building was surrounded by people at a glance. She squeezed in quietly and saw Mammy Li kneeling on the ground under the pressure of the government. Her pupils darkened and she didn't go out immediately. "Lord Li has ordered that Su Li is a slut and scourges a man of a good family. She is the shame of the Desa town. The traitor is guilty of adultery and will be arrested immediately. If people know that Su Li took it out, they can report it to the government. Mammy Li is still in the Desa town, which means that Su Li is still nearby. Su Li, if you don't show up, Mammy Li will suffer the pain of whipping. Think about it clearly." With the shout of the government advisor, the onlookers immediately exclaimed, but no one complained for Su Li. It's actually this crime. If Su Li is caught, she will be drowned in a pig cage. Even if she is not dead, she will be disabled. Mammy Li followed the wrong master. She is so unlucky. Su Li, the bitch, deserves this punishment. How could Su Li care about the life of servants? I am afraid that she has already escaped. Poor Mammy Li. Chu Qingning was anxiously looking for Su Li in the crowd. When he heard the government announcement, he was furious and said, "Su Li, don't be stupid. She is there." Finally, Chu Qingning saw Su Li in the front of the crowd. He was relieved and squeezed over. But he suddenly saw Su Li step out and take off the bamboo hat. "Oh no. Are you looking for me?" Su Li looked indifferent. Her long hair was like splashed ink. She was like a fairy who was above the common people. She said, "Let Mammy Li go, and I will go back with you." The advisor was shocked when he saw Su Li. and a strong desire flashed through his eyes. Very good, Su Li. You can take the initiative to come to justice. Maybe Lord Li will be generous and exempt you from death. The advisor waved his hand and said, tie Su Li up and go back to the mansion immediately. When Su Li saw the officers and soldiers rushing over, she immediately stepped back and said loudly, why don't you let Mammy Li go? Can the government break its promise? The advisor's proud expression froze, and then he waved his hand impatiently and let Mammy Li go. The little girl dared to be stubborn even when she was about to die. When they returned to the mansion, he would punish her. Maybe the county magistrate would find his conscience and he could get some benefits. Thinking of this, the advisor glanced at Su Li's sensitive parts without a trace, and the desire in his eyes was stronger. Miss Mammy Li was let go. She rushed to Su Li and grabbed her sleeves tightly. Her eyes were full of tears and her lips trembled. You shouldn't come. They must have colluded. If you are caught, you will definitely die. You can't go. Su Li shook off Mammy Li expressionlessly and whispered, go to meet with them. I will be fine. Being reminded, Mammy Li suddenly remembered Fong Yuan and others. Yes, hurry to find Master Fong to save the miss. She immediately rushed into the crowd and disappeared. The people around looked at her with disdain. The officers and soldiers rushed to escort Su Li back to the mansion. Su Li frowned and scolded, let go. I can walk by myself. An invisible deterrent spread out. The officers and soldiers all felt cold in their hearts and actually stopped. When the advisor saw this scene, he was immediately angry and scolded, Su Li, do you still think that you are the second miss of the Su family? Since you don't want to be escorted, come on, put on the rope. Crack! 2 officers and soldiers immediately came over with 2 pieces of wood. When the 2 pieces of wood were put together, they could just jam people's necks and hands. Then they were restrained with chains, like dogs being led by people. The advisor even asked Su Li to put on the shameful rope. When Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan in the crowd saw this scene, their eyes suddenly turned red. They couldn't help but rush out to kill the next moment. Suddenly. Chapter 76. When the advisor was in a panic, a golden scroll flew from the sky and smashed on his face. Who hit me? The advisor was furious and grabbed the scroll with one hand. Suddenly, he stared at the scroll in his hand blankly. His hands couldn't stop trembling as if he was holding a hot potato. This was the decree of the Qinghe provincial governor. The provincial governor was in charge of a county in the Han country. He was a real governor and had the power to kill countless people. Li Shanbao and the provincial governor were like the stars and the moon. They were not at the same level at all. As a young advisor, he was like a nonentity in front of the provincial governor. But today, he actually got the decree of the provincial governor. The advisor was so excited that he forgot about Su Li and looked up. There were more than 20 people coming. They looked cold and their eyes were like lightning. Their vigor rushed to the sky. They were all riding horses that could travel thousands of miles in a day. Their clothes were shining with golden light. The uniform golden pattern of the Qinghe provincial government was tattooed on their chests. It seemed that they were all the elite soldiers of the Qinghe provincial government. The leader was a woman in a cyan cloak. Her face was slightly pale. It was obvious that she didn't feel well all the way. When Su Li saw the woman, she slightly raised her eyebrows and didn't speak. The woman in cyan glanced at Su Li, and then saw the 2 officers and soldiers beside Su Li holding the jiajia. She snorted coldly and shouted, "Control all the officers and soldiers." Before she finished her words, the elite soldiers behind the woman dismounted without saying anything and quickly controlled the advisor and the officers and soldiers who didn't dare to resist. Lord, it's all a misunderstanding. The advisor was held by 2 elite soldiers on both sides. He was so scared that he was trembling all over. Lord! Just then, Li Shanbao in an official uniform ran to her in a panic and bowed. Lord, you came from afar. I didn't get the news and didn't welcome you. It's my fault. Lord Li, you don't have to greet me. When the woman in cyan saw Li Shanbao, she said with a faint smile, I'm not a member of the imperial court. I don't deserve your salute. I'm just here to issue a decree on behalf of the satrap. Li Shanbao was scared and broke into a cold sweat. He said involuntarily, "The decree of the satrap?" Could it be that the secret of his corruption for so many years was exposed? The woman in green nodded towards the elite soldier on the advisor's side. The elite soldier who was holding the advisor immediately snatched the golden scroll from the advisor's hand and opened it. I heard that there is a girl named Su Li in the Desa town, unparalleled in talent and learning at the tender age of 15. He understands the true meaning of the Tongzi of Dahan, which makes the head of Muyang Mansion feel inferior. He has been in school for 3 days, and he has subdued the senior embroidery artificer of Muyang Town with his profound knowledge of embroidery. He is also proficient in embroidery skills. He is really a genius. I'm very comforted, but I can't just sit back and watch you die in the Desa town. Therefore, Su Li, the second daughter of the Su family in the Desa town, was invited as an honorary lecturer of the Qinghe Girls' School. I hope you can continue to work hard in the Qinghe Girls' School and live up to your talent. Whoosh! The onlookers were so shocked that their eyes almost popped out. There were many troubles in the Desu town these days, but none was more shocking than this one. The name of Su Li was heard by the satrap of Qinghe province. Moreover, she became a lecturer of the girls' school at the age of 15. What an honor it was! For a moment, all eyes were focused on Li Shanbao and the advisor. Those eyes were full of anger for being deceived, but more of indescribable weirdness and gloating. The expression of the advisor and Li Shanbao was gradually distorted. Finally, they were petrified in the wind as if they were immobilized. There were hundreds of words in the decree, but it only mentioned one person. And this person turned out to be Su Li, whom they conspired to kill. Now, something big was going to happen. Li Shanbao was the first to react. He was so scared that his voice changed. "What are you doing? Throw away these shameful things." The 2 soldiers holding the wooden armor were pale. When they saw all the elite soldiers of Qinghe province looking at them, they couldn't stand such stimulation. They rolled their eyes and fainted. Li Shanbao's face was very ugly. He bowed and forced a smile that was uglier than crying, "Lord, these are all misunderstandings. It's the fault of the Su family and the Yang family. I also, Lord Li." The woman in indigo directly interrupted Li Shanbao and smiled sweetly. "If you have something to say, you'd better go to Qinghe province. I'm not an official. I have already made it clear, haven't I?" Li Shanbao's face was extremely bitter. It turned out that the woman in indigo said, not in the imperial court, actually wanted him to go to Qinghe province to plead guilty. The Qinghe Girls' School was the first school in Qinghe province. Its nature was comparable to the official government. If it was true that he offended the lecturer of such a school, he could argue for it. But he, the Yang family and the Su family all knew that everything was fabricated by them. It couldn't stand the investigation at all. Thinking of this, Li Shanbao couldn't help but tremble. A sense of suffocation rose from the bottom of his heart. Su Li was standing not far from him, but he couldn't move. Today he almost sent Su Li to drown in the pig cage. Such a great hatred. How could it be useful to plead for her? After dealing with the matter, the woman in indigo walked to Su Li. Her eyes were cold and her voice was extremely low. "This is the opportunity that my father exchanged for with his lifetime reputation. If you let him down, I will not let you go." Su Li heard the words and her eyes flashed. She figured out the cause and effect. It turned out that the old teacher was the headmaster of the Muyang Girls' School. No wonder he was so protective of her. Lecturer Ning was also the daughter of the headmaster. Although she didn't know what Ning Yunji promised in front of the satrap, the price was definitely not small. But she was very confused about one thing. Why did the old teacher do so much for her? It seemed unreasonable just because she was a student of the Muyang Girls' School. She was afraid that this doubt could not be solved until Qi Xianqing came back. Thinking of this, Su Li nodded gently. The woman in indigo was still unhappy. But this was her father's request, so she could only do it. This scene fell into the eyes of Li Shanbao and the advisor, but it was a performance of intimacy between the two. Li Shanbao regretted and cursed in his heart. Those grandsons of the Yang family said that Su Li was easy to bully. What was the background of the woman in indigo? She could even invite the Qinghe province. How could she say that she had no background? Pass the order. Thoroughly investigate the matter about Su Li within 3 days. 3 days later, we will return to the Qinghe province and make the clues into a file and give it to the satrap. As the woman in indigo gave a light order, all the elite soldiers roared in response. Li Shanbao blacked out and fell to the ground. It was over. In the Jinyuan court of the Su house, Su Li and Mammy Li returned to the old house. One was expressionless, and the other was complicated. Mammy Li thought that she had experienced ups and downs with the old miss in her life, but it was far less exciting than these days. The confrontation between the old miss and the Su family and the Yang family changed almost every day. When she thought that she almost got the old miss into trouble and put the old miss in prison, her heart seemed to be grasped fiercely, and she felt very uncomfortable. This guilt could not disappear. She could only rely on taking care of the old miss more carefully in the future to repay the old miss. Old miss, please bless me in heaven. I found a master who can be entrusted to me. Although she has many secrets and even makes me afraid sometimes, she is very good to me. Old miss, you can rest assured. In the kitchen, Mammy Li took out half of the jade pendant from her arms and closed her eyes to pray silently. Su Li stood in the empty study with her eyes slightly narrowed. She was silent. Ning Qing looked around and frowned slightly. The decoration here was very luxurious, but it was too vulgar. If this was Su Li's taste, then when she went to the Qinghe province, her father would be laughed at together with her. Did you live here before? She couldn't help but ask. Su Li nodded. My mother changed the decoration here, and it has changed beyond recognition. Ning Qing's expression was slightly relaxed. She had heard about the current situation of the Su family. Su Li was born in such a family and could be so outstanding, which showed her ability. According to her temperament, she would have broken off the relationship and run away from home long ago. You deal with the family affairs these 3 days. 3 days later, go to the Qinghe province with me. My father is still waiting for you there. Hearing Ning Qing's words, Su Li nodded and said, Lecturer Ning, can I take another person to the Qinghe girls' school? Ning Qing frowned and suddenly felt that Su Li was insatiable and didn't know what was good for her. But she still suppressed her temper and asked, Who do you want to take? If it is Mammy Li, it is no problem. After all, she is the mammy who takes care of you. But if you want to take someone to study at the Qinghe girls' school, it is impossible. Do you know that your situation is still not safe now? Su Li shook her head and said, It is Mei Ruhan. She was also dropped out of school. But I think it is no problem for her to be admitted to the Qinghe girls' school according to the normal procedures. Can we take her with us? It turns out to be her. Ning Qing suddenly understood and her face was slightly hot. She thought that Su Li wanted to play favoritism, but she measured the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Mei Ruhan was really a good child. This time she was involved in the Yang family, so it was reasonable that Su Li wanted to take her with her. Since it is not through the back door, it is no problem for us to take her with us. I will send someone to inform the Mei family. Ning Qing nodded and left directly with others. She didn't even look at Su Huanli, who stood beside like a servant. When Ning Qing went out of the gate of the Jinyuan court, Su Huanli retracted his head. Then he straightened up with a bitter face and said in a trembling voice, Li, I didn't expect that the Yang family was so cruel. Those things were done by your grandma behind my back. Don't misunderstand your father. Su Huanli was still lying comfortably on the bed. When he heard what happened in the town, he was so scared that he immediately jumped up from the bed. He didn't vomit blood or have a headache. He ran all the way to the Jinyuan court and drove Su Zipei and Zhu Yan out. Then he cleaned up quickly to show his attitude. He was really scared. Although Su Li was very filial in ordinary days, she almost died this time. Although he didn't directly participate in it, he didn't stop it. He just watched Ma'am. Su Chui forced Su Li into a dead end. Su Li sat calmly at the desk and played with the writing brush. She said nothing. Su Huanli was even more flustered and said, Li, forgive your father. Your father had no choice but to do it. I couldn't stop your grandmother from doing it. I kneel down for you, okay? Su Huanli knelt down with a plop and cried. Su Li sighed and got up to help Su Huanli up. She said softly, Daddy, how can I blame you? Even grandma and mother, I won't let them go to jail. But I don't understand why my grandma and mother treat me like that when I didn't do anything. What did I do wrong? Chapter 77. After the panic, Su Huanli looked at Su Li differently. His eyes were full of relief and pride. He didn't expect that Su Li could become a better person than his eldest brother so soon. Of course, if Su Huanli knew that Su Li extorted 600,000 taels of silver and 2 pieces of land from the Su family during this period, he would want to kill her. Li, you must do well in the Qinghe girls' school. Don't lose the face of our Su family. Yes, father. The scene in the Jinyuan court became extremely harmonious, as if there was no gap between the father and the daughter. As the news spread, the whole town knew that Su Li became a lecturer of the Qinghe girls' school. Li Shanbao was temporarily detained. Ning Qing posted the decree of the satrap on the bulletin board. Every day, countless people came to see it. Even people from the nearby towns came. The satrap was the highest position in the entire Qinghe province. Naturally, people had to see the decree written by such a person in person. With this decree, Su Li's reputation spread completely. The Mei family also got the news in the evening. Miss, great news. Gu jumped in from outside the door and her face was full of joy. Mei Ruhen frowned and asked, Is it related to Li? For her, the good news that had nothing to do with Su Li was not good news. The Yang family was so aggressive that even their business was affected. They wanted to force her to admit her mistakes. But she didn't let it go. Many people in the family were dissatisfied. She didn't know how Su Li was now. The Su family would not protect her. Miss, it's the news of Miss Su Li. Gu said excitedly. Mei Ruhan's face immediately brightened. What's the good news? Gu, tell me quickly. When Guo was about to say it, a sweet voice suddenly came from outside the door. Henin, the good news. A rich woman with gorgeous makeup came in from the door and said kindly, Your friend named Su Li was recruited by the Qinghe girls' school as a student. She is so lucky. Fourth aunt. Mei Ruhan stood up and saluted. A trace of disgust flashed in her eyes. She remembered that the fourth aunt said that she was short-sighted and a sinner of the Mei family a few days ago. She changed her words quickly. Madam, you're wrong. Guo stood out and said angrily, I heard that Miss Su was a lecturer in the Qinghe girls' school. How could she become a student? The wealthy-looking woman's expression immediately darkened. Why are you interrupting? Han Han, look at how much you've spoiled your own maidservant. Maybe one day she'll climb over my head and you won't do anything about it. Mei Ruhan slightly pursed her lips and said in a cold tone, I will take care of Xiaohan's maids. You don't need to say more. The fourth madam's expression changed slightly before returning to normal. She snorted and said, Fine, fine. Your father can do whatever you want. I can't be bothered to care. On the other hand, the rumors sounded extremely exaggerated. Su Li is only a teenager. How could she go to the school to be a lecturer? It's impossible. Speaking of this, the fourth madam showed a distressed look. She is successful, but what about you? The ban on the Muyang girls' school has not been withdrawn. If you don't apologize for one day, our Mei family will suffer with you. You have to think clearly. I'm not wrong. Why should I apologize? Mei Ruhan said angrily, Even my father supports me. Fourth madam, you are so diligent to come here. Did you receive any benefits from the Yang family? The fourth madam's expression changed immediately. She said, How is it possible? Han Han, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. I try my best to think about our family. How can I be partial to outsiders? At this moment, the old butler came from the yard and said in a hurry with a happy face, Miss, follow me to the front yard. The people of the Qinghe provincial office are coming. Mei Ruhan's beautiful eyes widened slightly. She seemed to think of something and smiled happily. Then she went out of the room without saying anything. Why do the people of the Qinghe provincial office come here? Could it be that what was said was true? It's impossible. I also want to go and have a look. The fourth madam was stunned and immediately followed. At this moment, in the front yard, the head of the May family was looking at the young people who came suddenly with a smile. He was well informed and knew the identity of these people. They were absolutely the trusted subordinates of the satrap. How respected they were! At this moment, they suddenly came to his home. He also just got the news of the Desa town. But these people came before he had time to read it. He also asked what happened, but this group of people ignored him and said expressionlessly that they wanted to see his daughter, May Ruhen. He faintly guessed something and was ecstatic. But he was afraid that he would be disappointed if he showed it. At this moment, May Ruhen came in from outside and said, "Father, I'm here." The head of the May family quickly stood up and took May Ruhen's hand. He said repeatedly, "Han, come and meet these officials of the Qinghe provincial office." The young leader also stood up and said with a smile, "Miss May, you don't have to be so polite. We come here to deliver a message for Lecturer Su." Lecturer Su? May Ruhen was stunned for a moment, and then the joy in her pupils enlarged rapidly. She couldn't help but be excited and said, "Does Su Li really become a lecturer of the Qinghe Girls' School?" The young man smiled and nodded slightly. The lecturers of the Qinghe Girls' School have a quota of recommendation every year. After Lecturer Su knew it, she immediately introduced Miss May. "Please prepare for it these days. 3 days later, we will go to the Qinghe Girls' School. If there is any inconvenience, just tell me." May Ruhen was stunned for a moment. After a while, her eyes were covered with a layer of mist. She covered the waist of the head of the May family and cried. The head of the May family sighed softly and smiled happily. This girl had been under a lot of pressure recently. Seeing this, the young man smiled more. This was like a teenage girl. As for Su Li, when he thought of the girl's unchanged expression when she heard the good news, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. After that, the young man left 2 people to escort May Ruhen and then left the May family. The fourth madam heard it clearly at the door. She stood in the same place stupidly and her heart was in turmoil. The rumor turned out to be true. The 15-year-old girl not only became a lecturer of the Qinghe Girls' School, but also took May Ruhen to the school. Why didn't such a good thing happen to her Ning? Thinking of the agreement between her and the Muyang Girls' School, the fourth madam looked gloomy. Now, it was impossible to send Ning to the school. In the next 3 days, Su Li stayed in the Su house and didn't go anywhere. The identity of the Baichao Tang couldn't be exposed. Otherwise, there would be trouble if Qi Xianqing was involved. The yard in the valley couldn't be exposed either. Otherwise, what she did secretly would no longer be a secret. Fortunately, there was a place in the Qinghe province. Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan would soon seal the valley and go to the Qinghe province to find her. On the morning of the 4th day, a large carriage stopped in front of the Desa town. Many people got up early to say goodbye to Su Li. They were full of guilt, but they didn't know how to apologize. They were not qualified to apologize, so they could only say goodbye to Su Li. May Ruhen got off the carriage. She saw Su Li again after a few days, but it seemed that it had been a long time. When she saw Su Li smile, she immediately cried. Guo also shed tears. Su Li just touched May Ruhen's small head with a gentle smile. At that moment, it was like hundreds of flowers in full bloom. The elite soldiers of the Qinghe province were all swayed and had cold sweat on their foreheads. They had always thought about Su Li's talent and learning, but they didn't find that Su Li was as beautiful as a fairy. She was quite charming. "Let's go." Ning Qing glanced at the people of the Desu town and gently squeezed the horse's belly. Suddenly, the sound of hooves was heard. The carriage set off. Suddenly, there was a shout from the people, "Miss Su Li, have a nice trip." "Miss Su Li, I'm sorry. We won't believe the rumor anymore." "Miss Su Li, take care." The voice behind her was getting farther and farther, louder and louder, and finally smaller and smaller. May Ruhen heard it with tears in her eyes. She clutched her chest tightly. Her heart was surging as if there was hot magma flowing through her. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly, and her gaze did not waver at all. She gently lifted the curtain and looked at the scenery outside. The first step of the plan could finally start. Ning Qing took care that Su Li and Mei Ruhan were ordinary people, so they walked very slowly. They didn't arrive at the gate of the Qinghe province until noon the next day. The officers and soldiers guarding the gates saw the sign of the Qinghe provincial office and immediately let them pass. Mei Ruhan leaned against the window and looked here and there. She couldn't help but say excitedly, "Li, the Qinghe province is so big and lively. Look at that restaurant. It is so high. It has 5 floors." Su Li nodded with a smile and glanced at the golden plaque on the 5th floor. Qinghe House. Mei Ruhan kept chattering along the way, which made the young man beside the carriage laugh in his heart. This little girl named Mei Ruhan was really cute. The carriage went all the way through the Qinghe town and stopped in front of the gate of the Qinghe school in the west of the city. As the most important educational institution in the entire Qinghe province, the Qinghe school occupied half of the size of the west of the city. The other half was also a satellite town with the Qinghe school as the center. Most of the people living in it were students or students who were about to enter the school or take the preliminary examination. Su Li glanced at the scattered taverns and inns, and a thought flashed in her heart. 10 months ago, the eldest brother, Su Qingtan, should also live in one of these inns, waiting for the preliminary examination. After the carriage stopped, the escorting elite soldiers left. Only Ning Qing, Su Li and Nanny Li were left. Mammy Li and Gui each held their luggage and looked at the huge golden characters, Qinghe School, that were several feet high. They sighed with emotion. "I didn't expect that I could enter such a place one day." Thanks to Miss Su Li, Gui looked intoxicated and then looked at Mammy Li beside her. She felt strange. The expression of the old Mammy was a bit strange. It seemed that she was recalling something. Did she come here before? Mammy Li's eyes were full of tears, and the throbbing in her heart almost couldn't stop. "Old miss, I didn't expect that I could come here again in this life. Old miss, I'm sorry. I lost the little miss." Ning Qing led Su Li and others to the side door beside the gate with ease. When the guard saw Ning Qing, he immediately bowed his head and saluted, "Lecturer Ning." Su Li was a little surprised when she heard the words. "Do you think it's strange?" Ning Qing said without looking back, "I was originally a lecturer here. Only because of my father, I went to the Muyang girls' school. I have to thank you for this. Otherwise, I don't know how long my father would stay in the Muyang town." Su Li's eyes flashed, and she tentatively asked, "What is Mr. Ning's identity here?" Ning Qing smiled and said, "You will know it later. Let's go. I will take Ruhan to go through the process of the entrance examination first." Mei Ruhan was shocked when she heard the words, and a trace of tension appeared on her ruddy face. But when she thought of the homework she had done these days, confidence emerged in her eyes. The sallow-faced administrator of the enrollment office saw Ning Qing coming and immediately said with a smile, "Lecturer Ning, long time no see. As soon as you come back, you bring 2 good students? This is a bit against the rules. The rules are rigid. Even you can only recommend 1 student a year." Chapter 78. When the yellow-faced administrator saw Su Li's immature face, he was so shocked that he almost choked. After a while, he calmed down and stared at her. He said incredulously, "She, the lecturer?" Ning Qing immediately signaled Su Li with her eyes. Su Li took out a brand new jade token with the words, "Su Li," written on it and the unique engraving of the Qinghe Girls' School. It couldn't be fake. "It turns out that you are Su Li, the one chosen by the satrap." The yellow-faced administrator was suddenly enlightened, and then he showed a meaningful expression. This matter had long been spread in the school. Many people were not convinced that Su Li was the youngest lecturer in the history of the school. However, these contradictions couldn't be controlled by a small administrator. She took Su Li's token and quickly completed the admission examination formalities for Mei Ruhan. Mei Ruhan and Gui stayed here. Ning Qing passed through the teaching area and took Su Li to a temporary courtyard to settle down. After sitting down, Ning Qing finally said, "Your identity as a lecturer was given by the satrap himself. So, it's no problem for you to recommend Mei Ruhan. But the subject you are going to teach is very problematic. So, this is the reason why I live in a temporary courtyard?" Su Li pointed at the words on the door. Ning Qing secretly thought that this woman was so careful. Then she nodded and said, "The examination for you will begin tomorrow morning. Don't lose my father's face. You should at least show that you are excellent in one aspect. I heard that you have good attainments in embroidery. It's better to show it tomorrow." Su Li nodded slightly to show that she understood. "Next, I will tell you the rules of the school. In fact, as a lecturer, there are few rules, but—" Ning Qing pointed at the high wall in the distance. "You can't go there." Su Li looked along the direction and couldn't help but ask, "What is that place?" "It's the martial arts field." Ning Qing raised her eyebrows and said, "The Qinghe Girls' School is not a small place like the Muyang School. It occupies half of the West City. Do you think that it only teaches poetry and female workers? You can read the details in this booklet. It should have been sent to you by a special person. I will give it to you by the way." Su Li took a thick booklet and nodded to thank her. She was not familiar with the people and the place, so she needed to figure out the distribution of the Qinghe school. Ning Qing roughly explained and left a lot of needlework for Su Li to practice. Then she left. She had done her best. Mammy Li was busy making the bed. Although she would only stay here for one night, she wanted to make the miss as comfortable as possible. Su Li opened the booklet and read it quietly. The Qinghe school deserved to be the first school in the Qinghe province. It was divided into two schools, the girls' school and the boys' school. Then it was further divided into two branches, the civil school and the military school. Learning the civil school to be an official was a test of the brain. The most important thing in learning martial arts was one's root and talent. Of course, they also had to learn culture. If they could master both the pen and the sword, they would be heavily nurtured by the academy and enter the Special First Academy. Students who graduated from the Institute of Martial Arts would usually enter various violent organizations in the imperial court or enter the military. There were also those who were not outstanding who were hired by their families to become instructors or guards. For children from poor families, there were no big wars now, but there were constant small-scale wars. It was faster for them to enter the military. If they could show enough potential in military strategy, they might even be promoted 3 levels and quickly climb up the status. The reason why Ning Qing didn't let Su Li go to the martial arts field was that there were often people who practiced martial arts. Although the students in the girls' school of martial arts were female, some of them were more terrible than male students. Swords had no eyes. If they were accidentally hurt, it would be fatal. After roughly understanding the distribution, Su Li had lunch and learned about the various types of courses in the girls' school. Ning Yunji fulfilled her wish and let her become a lecturer. She could come here to read rare books. Of course, she couldn't waste too much time on teaching. There were many courses in the girls' school. The Muyang Girls' School only had literature, embroidery, and women's morality. The Qinghe Girls' School was divided into courses such as literature, calligraphy, embroidery, morality, zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, etiquette, medicine, and cooking. The Qinghe Girls' School knew that learning was not proficient. Therefore, the new students could only choose one course to learn each year. After learning to a certain level, they could take the examination. After passing, they could choose the next course. This method was similar to what her husband taught her in the previous life. Zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting were definitely not good. Although her husband taught her a lot in the previous life and she gained a lot in Jianghu later, her foundation was still too shallow. Moreover, she didn't want to hand over what her husband taught her. Literature was easy to get thirsty. Calligraphy was easy to have problems if the handwriting was too exposed. Morality was the same as literature. Cooking was contrary to her upcoming plan. Su Li shook her head again and again. Finally, her eyes fell on the last name. She couldn't help but smile bitterly in her heart. She didn't expect that she would choose this one in the end. In the morning of the next day, a manservant came to the temporary courtyard to wait. Su Li followed him to a spacious teaching room. As soon as she entered the door, she attracted dozens of eyes. At the same time, the sound of discussion in the room disappeared completely. It was silent. Su Li glanced around the room and saw a large circular platform in the center of the room with a radius of 100 square meters. The seats around the platform were full of people. There were men and women, old and young. They were all over 25 years old and wore different colors of the Qinghe School's lecturers' uniforms. Su Li counted roughly and found that there were more than 50 people. Ning Qing sat among them and was secretly shocked. There were only more than 70 lecturers in the entire Qinghe Girls' School of Literature. Now, more than half of them came. When she came here, there were only more than 20 people who came to see her. Su Li's age was really too attractive. At this moment, the white-haired old lady sitting in the middle of the seats saw Su Li calmly walking to the middle of the field with a calm expression. She couldn't help but nod slightly. Just this presence alone was enough to make her peers feel ashamed. It must be known that when she was only 15 years old, she was still a little girl who only knew how to read books and didn't know the ways of the world. My daughter, Su Li, greets the lecturers of the Qinghe Girls' School. Su Li's voice was clear and resounded in the whole field. Many people were amazed, but more people were still doubtful and expressionless. Su Li, I am Wen Ruomin, the dean of the Qinghe Girls' School. Today, I will preside over the subject test for you. Do you have a favorite course? If you put it forward by yourself, we can save a procedure. Wen Ruomin's voice was kind. She got a lot of news from Qing Ning. Su Li's attainments in literature and embroidery were good, but she didn't know whether she could reach the level of teaching and educating people. Su Li nodded slightly and said, I choose embroidery. Hearing this, Ning Qing was relieved. This girl finally had some self-awareness and didn't choose literature. The dean's attainments in literature were unfathomable. It would be difficult to test literature. But it didn't mean that it was easy to test embroidery. Among the lecturers, at least 3 were top embroidery artificers. Their embroidery works could be sold at a sky-high price in the auction house. Wen Ruomin was slightly disappointed when she heard Su Li's words. But she quickly calmed down and said loudly, Feng Qingru is here. You can give Su Li a test. Feng Qingru. Su Li's pupils shrank and she turned around. She saw a young woman in a fiery red dress stood up. She had a beautiful face and a pair of slanted eyes, which made her very charming. At this moment, Feng Qingru looked at Su Li with a little dissatisfaction because she was also a genius embroidery artificer. She said loudly, Su Li, since you can stand here and ask to test embroidery skills, you must be a top embroidery artificer. Every top embroidery artificer has advanced embroidery skills that she is good at. Why don't you show me your advanced embroidery skills? Hearing this, many embroidery artificers were surprised and couldn't help whispering. The difficulty of the embroidery lecturer's test was far less than what Feng Qingru said. The advanced embroidery skills were too difficult and not every top embroidery artificer could master them. More senior embroidery artificers became top embroidery artificers by practicing their skills and practicing their skills. Feng Qingru became a top embroidery artificer at such a young age because of her advanced embroidery skills. However, Su Li was too young. Even if she knew the advanced embroidery skills, she couldn't reach the standard of the test. If she showed them, she probably couldn't pass the test. Su Li smiled bitterly. She was facing the master who taught her the embroidery skills in the last life. But in this life, they met here and inexplicably became rivals. The fate after her rebirth really made her speechless. Qingru, don't make trouble. Wen Ruomin couldn't help but scold her with a stern face. Before she finished her words, she heard Su Li's voice, I accept Lecturer Feng's test. Hearing this, all the lecturers, including Qing Ning, were stunned. Qing Ning even showed a little anxiety on her face. She remembered that in the Muyang Girls' School, Su Li showed that her basic embroidery skills reached the standard of a top embroidery artificer. Why couldn't she be provoked and directly agreed? Her father praised Su Li for being calm and not impulsive. She was really angry. You accept? Wen Ruomin was also a little unhappy. She thought that Su Li was too arrogant. This time, she could make Su Li suffer. She said, in this case, arrange it. Put on the embroidery board. As soon as Wen Ruomin finished her words, 2 manservants immediately came up and put the embroidery board in front of Su Li. At the same time, they handed the needlework box. Su Li threaded the needle and looked focused. She seemed to hear Feng Qingru's gentle exhortations in the previous life. Feng Qingru taught her the skill of the threaded flower needle. At that time, Feng Qingru was in her 30s and was already the first embroidery artificer in the Qinghe province. Now, she wanted to show Feng Qingru's excellent embroidery skills in the previous life to Feng Qingru, who was in her early 20s. Thinking of this, Su Li's eyes were clear. She pricked the first needle, the second needle. Her needling skills were getting faster and faster. She was very clear about what she wanted to do. The whole room was quiet for fear of affecting Su Li's embroidery. Seeing Su Li's fast needling skills, the embroidery artificer couldn't help but shake her head slightly. The advanced embroidery skill was not the basic embroidery skill. She needed to consider every stitch. If she made a mistake, she couldn't make up for it. This was also the most prominent difficulty of the advanced embroidery skill. Su Li's first performance had violated a big taboo. Feng Qingru snorted in her heart. Su Li was still a little girl with an impatient temper. How could the advanced embroidery skill be like this? She had thought that there was a rival in the school, but she didn't expect that she was an idiot. What? Suddenly, Feng Qingru's pupils shrank and she was shocked. She saw Su Li's wrist shake. That rhythm, her hand shook. She's finished. Many senior embroidery artificers who didn't see through it felt pity. They hadn't seen any advanced tactical matrix of Han embroidery needed to shake the wrist. Su Li must have made a mistake. If there was a mistake in the advanced tactical matrix, how could she continue? Well, stop. What are you embroidering for? In the crowd, a middle-aged woman shouted impatiently. Her voice was extremely harsh. Su Li was suddenly disturbed. Her fingers trembled violently. She pricked her fingertip and a drop of blood came out. She breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she didn't stab the needle. Because of the disturbance just now, her needle deviated. If she pricked it, she would lose everything. When the middle-aged woman saw Su Li pricked her finger, she laughed in her heart. Su Li couldn't help being frightened. When she was about to reprimand Su Li with her identity, she suddenly heard a thunderous shout. Wu Shuqin, what are you doing? Chapter 79. What can I do? Wu Shuqin finally reacted from the shock. She glared at Feng Qingru and said, Feng Qingru, don't think that you can yell at me because you are a genius embroidery artificer. Do you want us to wait for the rubbish embroidered by Su Li? Why are you yelling at me? Even Wu Shuqin said so about Su Li. Those senior lecturers who had not reached the top embroidery artificer could not help but nod and echo. Lecturer Wu is right. Since Su Li embroidered wrongly, she should stop. I also want to stop for a long time. The scene suddenly became chaotic. When Ruomin saw that the situation was not good, she snorted and drowned out the noise. She said slowly, Be quiet. How can you behave like this? Wu Shuqin, I'm in charge of the test today. I didn't say anything. Why are you yelling? Could it be that you've taken a fancy to this old body's seat and want to sit here as well? When Ruomin's voice was slow and peaceful, but it gave out infinite pressure. Wu Shuqin immediately broke into a cold sweat. She lowered her head and said, Dean, I didn't mean that. I am a little too anxious. I am also thinking for everyone. Since Su Li can't pass the test, why should we continue to waste time? Seeing that Wu Shuqin was still self-confident, Feng Qingru immediately laughed out of anger. She pointed at Su Li and snorted coldly, Wu Shuqin, open your eyes and look. If this is called rubbish, what you embroidered is a pile of shit. Qingru. When Ruomin snorted slightly and her eyes were slightly stern, she said, As a teacher, how can you even say such dirty words? Go back and copy the Book of Rites 300 times and give it to me in 3 days. Feng Qingru was scolded by Wen Ruomin. She calmed down and said, Yes, Qingru. Su Li's embroidery skills are actually better than mine. All the embroidery artificers here are not qualified to judge what she embroidered. Can you take Su Li's work to Miss Gong to have a look? Hearing that, all the people present were shocked. Didn't Feng Qingru provoke Su Li before? Why did she change her temper and speak for Su Li now? Feng Qingru, what nonsense are you talking about? Wu Shuqin jumped up like a cat whose tail was stepped on. She looked terrible and said, Su Li has obviously made a mistake and is not qualified to be an embroidery lecturer. Why did you ask the dean to give that kind of thing to Teacher Gong? What are your intentions? She had been displeased with Feng Qingru for a long time. This girl thought highly of herself and looked down upon embroidery artificers who were trained in ordinary needlework. Now she even openly targeted her. She didn't even have the qualification to give the embroidery to Miss Gong. If Wen Ruomin really sent Su Li's work to Miss Gong, Wen Ruomin wouldn't give it to Miss Gong. Where would she put her face? Some people don't have any other abilities, but their ability to be envious of the talented and capable is top-notch. Feng Qingru sneered. She quickly walked down from her seat and came to Su Li. She looked at Su Li holding her right hand, and the red on her fingertip had dried up. She couldn't help but feel a little sorry. If she hadn't looked down on Su Li at the beginning, Su Li wouldn't have been misunderstood by Wu Shuqin and others. But there were too many people present. Feng Qingru couldn't say the 3 words after a long time. Seeing this, Su Li smiled slightly. She opened the embroidery board, cut off the thread and took off the needle. Then she gently handed the embroidery, which was only a small part, to Feng Qingru. There was even a trace of friendliness in Su Li's peaceful smile. Feng Qingru felt ashamed. She took the embroidery carefully and put it in front of Wen Ruomin. Although Wen Ruomin's embroidery level was average, she had good eyesight under the influence of her good friend. She could see at a glance that Su Li's embroidery skill was extraordinary. Is this the string flower needle? Wen Ruomin's eyes brightened and her face showed a happy expression. She couldn't see much, but she knew that Su Li's advanced needlework was better than Feng Qingru's. She could see that Su Li's needlework was neat and tidy, and the whole pattern was smooth and lifelike. Moreover, Su Li's speed before showed that Su Li was better than Feng Qingru in advanced needlework. With this ability, Su Li deserved to be the top embroidery artificer. Good. Wen Ruomin couldn't help but stand up excitedly and exclaim, I didn't expect that Ning Qing picked up a treasure for our school. Su Li, would you like to be the embroidery lecturer? Su Li quickly stood up and nodded, Of course I would. Seeing the result, Wu Shuqin was stunned and didn't know what to do. According to Wen Ruomin's temperament, it was absolutely impossible for her to play favoritism. That was to say, that embroidery was really not rubbish. It was her eyesight that was too poor. The embroidery lecturers around felt itchy and couldn't help but leave their seats to watch. Soon, Wen Ruomin was surrounded by 3 circles inside and 3 circles outside. Then, there was a burst of exclamation. This embroidery skill, I don't quite understand it. It's very powerful. How can she draw the feet in such an angle? It's amazing. Unfortunately, there is only a small part of the picture. Is it a river? It gives me a feeling of sparkling water. If Wu Shuqin didn't stop it, we could see the whole picture. Unfortunately, yes, many people couldn't help but beat their chests and stamp their feet. Many of them followed Wu Shuqin to crusade against Su Li just now. Now they changed sides and joined the team to blame Wu Shuqin. Wu Shuqin stood still with a livid face. She opened her mouth and didn't know what to say. Generally, the level of lecturers who just enter the college is limited. They are all third-class lecturers. When their teaching level is improved and they are assessed again, they will be promoted to the second class. And Su Li, you are very likely to be a second-class lecturer directly. Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows and said, What are the benefits of being a second-class lecturer? There are a lot of benefits. Seeing that she aroused Su Li's interest, Feng Qingru immediately seized the opportunity and said, For young lecturers like us, in addition to imparting skills, it is also very important for us to develop ourselves. Of course, the college will not ignore this. So, the higher the level, the more time we have and the fewer courses we arrange for us. Moreover, we can get a lot of commission for each lecture, and the share of lecturers that we can use is also high. We don't need to worry about the lack of money when we want to do research. Su Li listened and nodded repeatedly. This rule was very in line with the philosophy of the college. Of course, more importantly, It was very to her taste. After all, she came to the girls' school to teach by the way. Naturally, she hoped to have more time to read the precious classics of the girls' school. Then Feng Qingru chatted with Su Li all the way, and soon they arrived at the gate of the temporary yard. Thank you for seeing me off all the way. Su Li pointed to the door plate and turned back to say with a faint smile. Feng Qingru was slightly stunned. When did this road become so short? She hadn't thought about how to say it yet. Su Li, Feng Qingru wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. She was so anxious that she was sweating. Finally, she plucked up her courage and said, Su Li, in fact, I also learned the threaded flower needles. What a coincidence. Feng Qingru was about to cry when she said this. Su Li almost laughed out. Why didn't she find that Feng Qingru had such a lovely side in her previous life? That's really a coincidence. Su Li blinked her eyes playfully and said, Thank you for protecting me today. In return, let's exchange embroidery boards in class and communicate more about embroidery in the future. How about that? Really? Feng Qingru was so happy that she almost jumped up. She originally wanted Su Li to teach her the unique skills that she showed in the test just now, but she didn't say it because it was a little too shameless. However, she could also understand Su Li's embroidery board with her ability. She was very clear that her embroidery board was of no use to Su Li. Su Li said it was an exchange, but in fact, it was to teach her. Of course. Su Li smiled and nodded. Seeing Feng Qingru laugh happily, she also felt at peace from the bottom of her heart. Chapter 80. At this moment, when Ruomin walked slowly through a peach blossom forest with a crutch and stopped in front of a large courtyard with simple decoration. Grandma Wen, do you come to chat with Grandma again? A girl in a white embroidered dress walked out quickly after hearing the sound. When she saw Wen Ruomin, a pair of pure eyes immediately showed surprise. She trotted over and supported Wen Ruomin. Wen Ruomin looked at the girl with loving eyes and could not help but nod slightly. Min, how is your grandma recently? Thanks to you, Grandma is in good health. It's just that she is old and has blurred vision. It's not suitable for her to fight. When Ruomin could not help but feel relieved, it doesn't matter if she can't fight. She has a granddaughter like you, so she has a successor. Grandma, you flatter me. I'm still far from being your granddaughter. Although Gong Min said so, her eyes were shining with joy. Obviously, she was very happy to be praised by Wen Ruomin. Ruomin, why do you have time to come here? An old woman's deep voice came from the study. Gong Min quickly stuck out her tongue and helped Wen Ruomin in. After making tea for the two old people, she stepped back. The old woman sitting in the study had white hair, and her face was covered with age spots. Obviously, she was older than Wen Ruomin. At this moment, she held a scroll in her hand and looked far away from her eyes. No one knew what she was looking at. When Ruomin sat down and looked at the old woman, she could not help but sigh and said with a smile, Gong Xiangjuan, you are so old. Don't you know to take a break? Gong Xiangjuan put down the scroll and snorted, you still occupy the position of the dean and refuse to leave. How can you say that to me? Well, you say that every time you come here. I'm just 5 years older than you. I know my body. As long as you find someone to replace me, I won't go to class. I really have such an ideal candidate. When Ruomin smiled meaningfully and put a small half piece of embroidery on the table. Gong Xiangjuan looked at it from a distance and then looked back at the book. He said, Qingru, her string flower needles are really good. She will be promoted to the first class in a year or two. But it's still early. Why do you take her embroidery? When Ruomin immediately laughed and shook her head, this is not embroidered by Feng Qingru. Look carefully. Gong Xiangjuan was startled after hearing that. Then she picked up the piece of embroidery and gently stroked it with her fingers. Her face immediately showed some surprise. Her hands had always been well maintained, and they looked 10 years younger than her age. Although her eyesight was not good, she could basically tell the truth with just a touch. But this time, she couldn't get it. Strange, strange, Gong Xiangjuan muttered and opened the drawer on her left. She took out a pair of glass lenses and put it in front of her eyes. She put it close to the embroidery and observed it carefully. When Ruomin looked a little more serious. She was just joking. She didn't expect that Gong Xiangjuan would take out the glass pieces. These were special lenses made by the best craftsmen invited by satrap Yen. With this, Gong Xiangjuan could still be active in the embroidery workshop at the age of 75. It could be said that the glass lens was Gong Xiangjuan's special treasure, and she would not easily show it in front of others. Time ticked by, and the tea turned cold. Gong Min came in to pour tea again. She saw the two old people staring at the small piece of embroidery in a daze. She was immediately curious, but she consciously did not disturb them. She refilled the tea and went out again. When the second cup of tea became cold, Gong Xiangjuan finally raised her head and said solemnly, "I have never seen this kind of string flower stitch. It has a tendency to form a school of its own. If she can succeed, she may become the originator of a school." "Ramin, where did you get this embroidery cloth? Is it the owner of the cloth who will replace me that you said? She is really qualified." When Ruomin opened her mouth, and she was extremely surprised in her heart. It was a joke, but it became true. She really didn't know what to say now. "Which master was poached by you? Is it Meng Litong of Yuezhi province? Or Lv Yashuan of Siki province? Tell me. Take me to see her." Seeing that when Ruomin didn't speak, Gong Xiangjuan suddenly became anxious. When Ruomin came to her sense and quickly comforted her, "Calm down. Calm down. She won't run away. She is in the academy now. This embroidery was just embroidered. Why is it not complete?" Gong Xiangjuan was relieved when she heard the words. Then she frowned and said, "If an embroidery is not complete, it has no soul. With the strength she has displayed, there is no way she would know this." "Well, there was an accident." When Ruomin braced herself to explain, Wu Shuqin seemed to make a big trouble. If she said it, according to Gong Xiangjuan's temper, she might immediately kick Wu Shuqin out of the academy. "What accident?" Gong Xiangjuan's face changed as expected. "Someone dares to bully such a master?" When Ruomin felt anxious and said with a wry smile, "Don't ask. I'll let her come to see you." "It's not appropriate." Gong Xiangjuan immediately stood up and took the crutch beside her. "Even if that person is a little younger than me, she can create a new school. Her attainments in embroidery skills are already equal to mine. How can I let her come to see me? It's unreasonable. I'm going to change clothes and then you go to see her with me. You haven't told me who she is. Is it Meng Litong or Lv Yashuan?" Gong Xiangjuan's mouth was like a machine gun. When Ruomin suddenly collapsed and quickly let Gong Xiangjuan sit down, "My old sister, just sit down. That little girl is only 15 years old. She is not a little younger than you. She is several generations younger than you. 15 years old." Gong Xiangjuan suddenly froze. After a long time, she murmured, "Are you kidding me?" After 10 minutes, Su Li stood in front of the quaint courtyard. Gong Min was curious, but she still maintained the courtesy. She nodded and said, "Grandma wants to see you. Come with me." Su Li followed Gong Min into the room and saw Wen Ruomin and Gong Xiangjuan at a glance. She calmed down and walked over to salute. "I'm Su Li. Greetings, Dean Wen and Dean Gong." Gong Min wanted to stay and have a look, but when Ruomin signaled her with a look, she could only go out and close the door. Gong Xiangjuan saw Su Li's immature face and still couldn't believe her eyes. She picked up the embroidery cloth and asked, "Little girl, your name is Su Li, right? Is this embroidery cloth really embroidered by you?" Su Li nodded. Then she hesitated for a moment and said, "I still have some doubts. I don't know whether I should ask." When Ruomin immediately laughed and said, "I know what you want to ask. You may not have heard of Dean Gong. She has retired for many years and has been teaching in the college. Now half of the top embroidery artificers in the embroidery workshop in the Qinghe province are her students. Feng Qingru is her personal disciple. Do you know that?" Su Li's eyes flashed. Was this old lady Feng Qingru's teacher? She had heard of her in the previous life, but she had never seen her. Because when she met Feng Qingru, Gong Xiangjuan had passed away. Feng Qingru always said that she hadn't seen her teacher for the last time. Because Gong Xiangjuan suddenly contracted a bad disease and died too fast, Feng Qingru was abroad at that time and had no time to come back. Remembering this memory, Su Li looked at Gong Xiangjuan calmly. As expected, she found that Gong Xiangjuan was a little gloomy. But she didn't feel her pulse, so her judgment was not accurate enough. Gong Xiangjuan quickly stood up and interrupted Wen Ruomin. Why do you say this? Shameful. Then she touched the embroidery in her hand and sighed. The new generation excels the old. Your embroidery skill foundation is extremely solid. I am afraid that you have worked hard. Just from the flatness of the embroidery, I can see that your basic needlework has also reached the level of the top embroidery artificer. The string flower needle is an extremely difficult embroidery technique in Han embroidery. You actually managed to innovate on it. You've really broadened my horizons. I can die without regrets now that I've seen this in my lifetime. Xiangjuan, hearing her old friend suddenly said so, Wen Ruomin couldn't help but worry. Gong Xiangjuan waved her hand and smiled. I'm fine. I just said it out of feelings. Then she turned around and said, Su Li, would you like to take over my position and teach the special class? Even Su Li, who was steady, was stunned for a moment when she heard this. Special class? What was that? She saw from the booklet that there were only senior and junior classes. Wen Ruomin was also shocked and quickly stopped her. Xiangjuan, you can't do this. Su Li is too young. I'm afraid that it's difficult to convince others. Gong Xiangjuan waved her hand and said, Don't be afraid. How can I take back what I said? Besides, that group of little girls were all very arrogant, and it was time for someone to rub their spirit down a notch. Su Li, would you like to do that? Looking at Gong Xiangjuan's smiling face, Su Li was silent for a moment. But she didn't nod. Instead, she asked, Deans, I want to ask you something. If I take over the special class, how much free time can I have to read? I heard that the classics of the Qinghe Girls' School are very good. Hearing Su Li's words, the two old people were instantly stunned. If anyone else heard Gong Xiangjuan's words, they would definitely be overjoyed and moved to tears of gratitude. It was not an exaggeration to regard Gong Xiangjuan as a second parent. But Su Li actually hesitated to accept it. After being stunned for a long time, Gong Xiangjuan suddenly laughed out loud. Wen Ruomin also covered her face and smiled bitterly. Ha! Su Li, you really don't know what the special class represents? Su Li said helplessly, I just arrived at the Qinghe province yesterday. Girl, you don't have to worry about it at all. Being refused by Su Li once, Gong Xiangjuan was in a surprisingly good mood. There are only 5 students in the special class. Those little girls don't have much time in the college. Generally, there is only 1 class in 7 days. You have a lot of time to hang out in the girls' school. Besides, the treatment of the special class lecturer is high. Su Li didn't pay much attention to the latter part. It couldn't be better that there was only 1 class in 7 days. In this way, she could spend more time on herself and wouldn't delay her practice and refining medicine. It was really excellent. Besides, the salary of the special class lecturer, Gong Xiangjuan was still talking hard. Wen Ruomin couldn't help but interrupt. Okay. Say something else. She could see that Su Li was absent-minded. Except for time, this girl was not interested in anything else. Gong Xiangjuan stopped talking happily and was not angry. She looked at Su Li's eyes and liked her very much. It was really a great joy in life to see such an excellent junior in her later years. Wen Ruomin also sighed with emotion. Su Li reminded her of a person. Although that person was not as amazing as Su Li, she was also a descendant of a poor family. But later she heard that the girl died early and left nothing, which was really sad. After an hour, Su Li left the courtyard with a golden badge in her hand. The residence of the special class lecturer. You can choose any courtyard in the mountain, big or small. You can't live in the advanced courtyard, let alone the special class courtyard. In addition to old women like us, there are only a group of old guys in the College of Martial Arts. You are also a lecturer, so you don't have to be afraid of them. Thinking of what Wen Ruomin said, Su Li walked away, leaving the girl in white with a dull face. Chapter 81. Back to the courtyard, Su Li immediately asked Mammy Li to pack things. Mammy Lee suddenly panicked and said, "Miss, where are we going? Today's test?" Seeing Mammy Lee's appearance, Sue Lee nodded with a smile and said, "Hurry up. We will move to the lecturer's courtyard today." Miss passed. Mammy Lee was overjoyed. She immediately agreed and went to the room to pack up quickly. Because Mammy Lee knew it was a temporary courtyard, she didn't unpack all the things. It was easy to pack them up. Not long after, two quick-witted young manservants pushed a small cart and stopped outside the door. "Lecturer Su, my name is Xiaowu, and he is Datian. We will be your servants and be responsible for cleaning your courtyard. Mammy Lee only needs to take care of the lecturer's daily life." The young man named Xiaowu looked at Su Li, who was the same age as them. He felt complicated, but he didn't dare to show any disrespect. They finally got into the school and got the position that everyone in the village envied. They couldn't lose it. Su Li smiled and nodded. "Mammy Lee, have you packed your things?" "Sit." Mammy Lee struggled to come out with big and small bags. When she saw the two teenagers in plain clothes at the door, she was stunned for a moment. Then she immediately reacted and said in a gentle voice, "Thank you for your help. Otherwise, I have to carry the things with the miss." "Don't mention it." Xiaowu and Datian were both frightened. They quickly took the bags and carefully put them on the wooden cart. Manservants like them were the lowest servants of the school. No one would say thank you to them. Mammy Lee was not surprised. The Qinghe girls' school was the same as before. Many years ago, she was also a maid here. A group of people quickly went up the mountain. Su Li walked in the front. They turned left and right along the flat stone road. The deeper they went, the clearer the air became. The buildings were more and more luxurious. Mammy Lee was frightened and couldn't help but pull Su Li's sleeve. "Miss, are we going to the wrong place? Only special class lecturers are qualified to live here. You are a third-class lecturer at most, and your residence is at the foot of the mountain." Su Li's eyes flickered slightly when she heard the words. Xiaowu and Datian were also panicked. They had never been here and doubted that the lecturer, who looked too young, led them the wrong way. Su Li didn't answer Mammy Lee's words. Instead, she pointed forward and said, "Follow me. It's just ahead." With that, she took the lead and walked over. Mammy Lee felt bitter and could only keep up quickly. Finally, Su Li stopped in a medium-sized house. The walls of the whole courtyard were carved with bluish-gray rocks, and there were reliefs of strange beasts on them. Tall trees poked their heads out of the courtyard wall. They were verdant and lush, cutting the sunlight into pieces and projecting it onto the wall. One could vaguely smell the sweet osmanthus fragrance of the evening osmanthus. Su Li looked around again. She could hardly see other courtyards with the naked eye. It was very quiet. "This is it." Su Li directly pushed open the heavy wooden door and walked in. "Miss, we can't live here." Mammy Lee wailed and immediately caught up with her. Xiaowu and Datian had no choice but to follow him. Inside the courtyard, the layout was more exquisite. The whole two-story attic was made of mahogany, and the furniture was camphor wood, exuding a refreshing fragrance. Su Li went up to the second floor and opened the window. She could see the rockery and flower pond downstairs. The branches were orderly. There were withered lotus leaves on the surface of the pond. If it was summer, there would be lotus flowers everywhere and the fragrance would fill the room. Of course, these were just the appearance for Su Li. More importantly, the nimbus here was relatively rich. She observed along the way and found that many good places had been occupied. Finally, she could only choose the second place. "If I can find the starwood, I can slightly transform it. But I practice by myself and configure enough elixirs. The geographical advantage will be left to fate." Su Li thought so and went downstairs. At this moment, Mammy Lee was restless downstairs, for fear that someone would come in at this time and punish them. Xiaowu and Datian were even more pale, and their legs were trembling. Seeing this scene, Su Li shook her head. She didn't want to say it, but she was afraid of leaking the news in advance. Although she knew that the news that she became a special class lecturer would be spread out sooner or later, she still hoped that the present peace could last for a few more days. Of course, compared with the trouble of giving a lesson every 7 days, Su Li still felt that the latter was more attractive. "Mammy, clean up the room," Su Li gently took out a golden badge and put it on the table. Then she said to Xiaowu and Datin, "You two go to clean the courtyard. Although the courtyard has been cleaned regularly, there are still too many weeds." When Mammy Li saw the golden badge, she was puzzled at first. Then she suddenly thought of something, and her eyes showed extreme shock and horror. "Mississippi! How did you get this thing? Give it back." Mammy Li pointed at the badge, as if she had seen a ghost. She recognized what it was. Seeing Mammy Li's reaction, Su Li's eyes became deeper. She turned over the back of the badge and said, "How could I steal it? Do you think that your miss is stupid and brings you here regardless of anything?" Seeing the two bright words, Su Li, on the back of the badge, Mammy Li was completely stunned. At this moment, it seemed that the two words, Su Li, turned into an electric current from the top of her head, flowed through her whole body, and slipped away from the soles of her feet. Half of her body was numb. How could the miss become a special class lecturer after one day? That was a special class lecturer. There were no more than 10 people in the entire Qinghe school. And how many lecturers were there in the Qinghe school? There were nearly 80 female students in the College of Arts, not to mention the other 4 colleges. Was she dreaming? Mammy Li pinched her face fiercely. The next moment, she uttered a very pleasant scream. "Ouch, it hurts. Miss, I'm going to clean up now." After receiving the message, Mammy Li's face immediately turned red, and she walked like the wind. Xiaowu and Datian were stunned. "Brother, you are experienced and knowledgeable. What is that badge?" Datian couldn't help but ask. Xiaowu suddenly had a toothache. He didn't know it, but in order to be pretentious in front of his brother, he immediately said, "Stupid. You don't even know it. Lecturer Su lives in such a luxurious place. Of course, she is a first-class lecturer. I don't think she looks like one." Before Datian finished his words, his head was flicked by Xiaowu. He said, "Doesn't look like one? Bullshit. We can't inquire about these things. Hurry up and clean up the courtyard with me." In the next few days, the entire Qinghe Girls' School was unusually quiet. Mei Ruhan successfully became a third-class student of the Qinghe Girls' School by her own ability. At her age, she was outstanding in the Muyang town. But when she came to the Qinghe province, she found that she was just one of the ordinary peers, not even outstanding. It was the first time that Mei Ruhan had such a feeling. She felt lost, but she was more motivated. It was a good thing to have a goal. In those years in Muyang town, she had no direction, so her progress slowed down. "I don't know how Su Li is. I haven't heard about her courses these days. I want to go and listen to them." Mei Ruhan held the black cover of the Dictionary of Dahan and couldn't help muttering in her heart. In addition to Mei Ruhan, Ning Qing, Feng Qingru and Wu Shuqin also inquired about the final results secretly. But no matter how they inquired, Su Li seemed to disappear completely. The college didn't arrange courses and no one knew where she lived. "What's the matter? We can't even find her. Doesn't she need to attend classes?" Wu Shuqin was almost suffocated, but she didn't dare to ask Wen Ruomin. She could only continue to inquire secretly. "Dad, why don't you ask where Su Li is now?" In the courtyard, Ning Qing couldn't help but complain. In the past 2 days, she searched all the third-class and second-class courtyards, but she couldn't find Su Li. As a second-class lecturer, she couldn't enter the first-class courtyard, which was really uncomfortable. Ning Yunji laughed and said aloud, "You don't need to look for her. That girl was doing well now. She went to soak in it every day. Of course, you can't find her. What class is she? There are no classes arranged in the college these days." Ning Qing was slightly shocked. It had been 3 days. There were no classes for 3 days. Was she really a first-class lecturer? It should be known that the second-class lecturer had to give at least 2 classes in 3 days. Su Li didn't come to teach, which could explain the problem. Ning Yunji shook his head and said, "You will know it later. Don't ask more now so as not to make trouble for Su Li." Ning Qing felt her scalp numb. Her father's attitude was not first class. Could it be? She didn't dare to think more and turned to leave. If what she thought was true, when the news spread, Su Li would inevitably cause a stir in the college. No wonder her father didn't tell her a word. On the other side, Feng Qingru found Gong Xiangjuan and then left with a face of shock and joy. She didn't expect that Su Li's embroidery level was much better than what she saw. On the 6th day, all the embroidery lecturers of the girls' school began to be impetuous. They didn't even see Su Li in the past 6 days. Was she directly driven out of the school because of the embroidery that Dean Gong criticized as worthless? I even searched all the courtyards of the first-class lecturers, but I didn't find her. In the past 2 days, her name was not in the class schedule. Sure enough, she is just a person with a false reputation. A 15-year-old top embroidery artificer is too fake. The last sentence was uttered by Wu Shuqin solemnly and solemnly. In the past few days, her heart was in turmoil. It could be said that she had experienced a roller coaster experience. Fortunately, she won in the end. When Feng Qingru and Ning Qing heard Wu Shuqin's words, they smiled at the same time. Then they tacitly didn't tell Wu Shuqin the truth. They were looking forward to Wu Shuqin's expression tomorrow. In the evening of the 7th day, after the class, Wu Shuqin came to the class schedule with her classmates as usual and waited. The Qinghe Girls' School had a huge manpower cooperation. The time of each lecturer was not fixed. So, the daily classes were arranged temporarily and released in the evening. Wu Shuqin and others were waiting for the class schedule tomorrow. By the way, Shuqin, you are about to pass the second-class lecturer qualification. You don't have to work hard in class every day. I envy you. Congratulations, Shuqin. Hearing the compliments of the lecturers around her, Wu Shuqin smiled and thanked them again and again. At her age, she had enough experience. Passing the assessment and becoming a second-class lecturer was her reward. It was almost a done deal. She was almost 40 years old now and couldn't stand the tiredness of attending classes every day. A group of people walked to the class schedule. As soon as Wu Shuqin appeared, she was immediately stared at by countless eyes. She had experienced this kind of situation only in the course test. It was the second time today. Is it the result of my assessment of the second-class lecturer? Wu Shuqin was happy and immediately quickened her steps to the front of the crowd. In fact, she didn't need to squeeze. When she went forward to see the class schedule, everyone automatically made way for her. Those expressions were full of indescribable weirdness. Unfortunately, Wu Shuqin was too happy to notice it. Chapter 82. Special First Class, Embroidery. Lecture, Su Li. Wu Shuqin's smile froze on her face instantly. The bright red characters were magnified in her eyes like a nightmare. How could Su Li become a special class lecturer? There was only 1.5 in the special class, and Dean Gong had always been in charge of it. Was Su Li just another person with the same name? Wu Shuqin kept trying to convince herself, but her face became paler and paler. When Ruomin took Su Li's embroidery to the special class a few days ago. Today, the lecturer of the special class changed. Su Li couldn't be someone else. She is only 15 years old. Is there a mistake? Wu Shuqin's lips trembled violently. It seemed that she had severely offended Su Li in the test that day. Now, with Su Li's power, if she cast a negative vote on her assessment, then, thinking of this, Wu Shuqin couldn't help but feel dizzy. Su Li is coming. It's Su Li. At this moment, the crowd burst into an uproar, and then neatly separated to make a way. A girl in a plain white dress came calmly with a quaint file in her hands. Her eyebrows were curved, and a pair of pure black pupils were reflected under her thick and curly eyelashes, like the moonless starry sky. Her nose was small and tall, which set off the perfect side face. Her hair was casually spread behind her like splashed ink. There was only a simple green hairpin in her hair bun, but it was amazing. She was like a woman coming out of a painting, infinitely beautiful. What a beautiful girl! Many lecturers who saw Su Li for the first time exclaimed, "If I can have such a beautiful daughter, even if she is an idiot, I will accept her." Is she Su Li? She is a special class lecturer of the girls' school at the age of 15, and she is so beautiful? For a moment, many female lecturers who imagined Su Li was a talented but not beautiful female lecturer were all stunned. Was she the daughter of God? Su Li walked to the lesson board and saw her courses. She couldn't help but frown when she glanced back and saw dozens of eyes. She heard that Xiaowu had a class today, so she came to have a look. She didn't expect that so many people were waiting for her here. Su Li, where have you been these days? I can't find you. Feng Qingru came over and said with envy, Congratulations, I have heard it from the teacher. Su Li pursed her lips slightly and showed a cordial expression. She whispered, There are too many people here. Let's talk about it in detail when you go to my place. Feng Qingru's eyes brightened, and she nodded repeatedly. Su Li, congratulations. Ning Qing walked over with a look of amazement. Her attitude was completely different from 7 days ago. She didn't expect that the young girl that her father tried so hard to protect would actually be so talented that even Dean Gong was willing to give up his position. She was also a little scared because if it wasn't for her father's insistence, she would never have agreed to it. Now that he thought about it, if Su Li really stayed in the Desa town for a lifetime, it would be a real pearl covered with dust. Now that she came to a bigger stage, this pearl finally bloomed the brilliance she deserved. Su, was Qing said. Li and teacher at the Ming. Ming. Ning Qing was even starting to believe that some of her father's nonsense might be true. Seeing Ning Qing, Su Li's face was full of gratitude. Thanks to the help of you and Elder Master, I have been familiar with the affairs of the academy these days. After class tomorrow, I will come to thank you. Ning Qing had a better impression of Su Li. She nodded with a smile and said, Well, I will pour a pot of new tea for you. After they finished talking, many people wanted to say a few words to Su Li, but they couldn't find a chance. They could only watch Su Li and Feng Qingru leave. From beginning to end, Su Li didn't look at Wu Shuqin. Wu Shuqin stood aside like a puppet. Her face was pale, but she was relieved in her heart. Yes, Su Li was already a special class lecturer. How could she deal with a nobody like her? She didn't even want to embarrass her in the second-class lecturer's assessment, which was not in line with her identity and self-restraint. Wu Shuqin felt that she had escaped a disaster, but she was not happy. She looked at Su Li with more hatred. Su Li, don't think that you can sit back and relax after you become a special class lecturer. Those students in the special class are not so easy to deal with. Wu Shuqin said with hatred and left with a long face. Those lecturers who congratulated her before all avoided her as if they saw a plague. Many people knew that she offended Su Li. Su Li couldn't do anything, but it didn't mean that others couldn't. Su Li came to the house with Feng Qingru. Feng Qingru couldn't help but envy Su Li when she saw such a quiet and exquisite courtyard. The treatment of a special class lecturer was really good. By the way, Su Li, when will you go to the embroidery workshop? Feng Qingru couldn't help but ask after visiting. Su Li kept pouring tea and said lightly, Why should I go there? I am not a worker of the embroidery workshop. Even in the previous life, Su Li was not a formal worker of the embroidery workshop in the Qinghe town. Although her embroidery skills were good enough, she didn't get the corresponding title because of various obstacles. So, her treatment was much worse than that of other embroidery artificers. Feng Qingru couldn't help but be stunned. She felt strange and said, Really? You took over the teacher's position and became the only special class embroidery lecturer in the Qinghe girls' school. Naturally, you became the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Didn't the teacher tell you that? Su Li was really confused. She raised her head and looked confused. She remembered that she was absent-minded in front of Gong Xiangjuan that day. There seemed to be such a sentence. Seeing Su Li's expression, Feng Qingru suddenly burst into laughter and said, You have been the workshop owner for 7 days, but you haven't seen it even once. All the embroidery artificers in the embroidery workshop were scared and shivered. I thought they did something to make you unhappy. It turns out that you didn't know it. Ha, it's so funny. A few black lines appeared on Su Li's forehead. Gong Xiangjuan did it thoroughly. She not only gave her the special class lecturer position, but also gave her the embroidery workshop. The special class lecturer was quite free, but the embroidery workshop was not so good. For a moment, Su Li didn't know whether she made a profit or was cheated. But it seems that you are not willing to be the workshop owner? Seeing Su Li's depressed expression, Feng Qingru said angrily, "If other embroidery artificers in the embroidery workshop see this, they will definitely be annoyed by you. Do you know what the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop represents?" Su Li handed over the teacup and sighed with emotion. That position represents the first embroidery artificer in the Qinghe province. Regardless of power and status, it is even comparable to the satrap. Senior Gong really thinks highly of me. It turns out that you know it. Feng Qingru opened her beautiful eyes slightly and said, "Then why are you still unwilling?" Su Li smiled and shook her head slightly. "It's not that I am unwilling, but that I can't afford it. There are so many people from aristocratic families in the embroidery workshop. I am afraid that it will be troublesome for me to be the workshop owner." "It doesn't matter." Feng Qingru was full of confidence. "With your embroidery skills, you can be the workshop owner. It is enough to convince people. The teacher will also support you behind your back. No one will say anything. I see that the teacher usually does nothing. Only when the embroidery workshop receives difficult orders, she will ask the workshop owner to take action. Besides, you can take 10% of the embroidery workshop's income. Every year, you can go to Yunjing to participate in the county embroidery conference. There are so many advantages. Don't waste it." Feng Qingru said that many workshop owners had power. Su Li was more and more surprised. Why did Gong Xiangjuan let her manage such an important position like a child's play? What on earth did she do? Or, she knew that she would die soon, so she took the gamble? Su Li's eyes were deep. Looking at Feng Qingru, who was cheerful and totally different from the person in the previous life, Su Li faintly felt that something extraordinary would happen in these years, which caused Feng Qingru's temperament to change greatly and she would become the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Well, I will help her clear some obstacles before that. Su Li completely calmed down after this thought flashed through her mind. She said, "I will go and have a look the day after tomorrow. I have to meet an old senior tomorrow. I don't know how long it will take." Su Li's sudden calmness surprised Feng Qingru. But she was also happy for Su Li when she heard that Su Li was no longer entangled. She repeatedly asked Su Li to keep the embroidery board for class and then left. "Whoosh whoosh whoosh, miss, it's windy. Go into the room quickly. Don't catch a cold." Su Li said nothing and stepped to the second floor. Looking at the crazy swaying trees in the courtyard, she sighed in her heart. It was clear that a storm was coming. The news spread among the lecturers. That night, the news that a 15-year-old girl became a special class lecturer of the girls' school had spread throughout the Qinghe girls' school. Even the men's school had heard about it. In the satrap's mansion, the girl in red was sweating. She picked up a dark steel bow beside her and easily pulled the string. Clang! An arrow broke through the air and hit the bull's eye. Clap, clap, clap. The little girl standing on the side with a quiver suddenly applauded. "Miss, you are so awesome. You hit the bullseye again." Hearing that, the girl in red helplessly looked at the little girl and put down the longbow. Her eyes unconsciously drifted to another pure silver longbow. She hesitated for a long time and finally did not dare to take it. Her father said that only when she pulled the bow and hit the bull's eye from 200 meters away could she be set free. But now she couldn't even pick up the bow. It was too difficult. Her father was obviously forcing her. "Miss, you should go to the school tomorrow. It's embroidery." The little maid came to remind her. The girl in red nodded carelessly and muttered, "I don't know what to learn." Mrs. Gu never learned embroidery, but she also became a female general. That old woman still insisted that I was wrong. Hearing that, the little maid immediately smiled and said, "Miss, you are wrong. I heard that the lecturer of the special first class has been changed. She is not Grandma Gong." Substitutions? The girl in red was surprised and immediately became nervous. Is the old woman okay? Is there something wrong with her body? Why didn't my father tell me? The little maid immediately laughed. Although the miss had a sharp tongue, she actually cared about Grandma Gong very much. Grandma Gong thought she was too old and chose the lecturer herself. And I heard that the lecturer is only 15 years old, the same age as you. Hearing that, the girl in red slightly opened her beautiful eyes. A 15-year-old lecturer? Is that old woman out of her mind? The little maid stuck out her tongue. Juan doesn't know. Miss, you will know when you see her tomorrow. Chapter 83. Miss, it's time to go to school. The next morning, Xiaowu shouted outside the door. Yesterday, they knew that Su Li was not a first-class lecturer at all, but a more advanced special class lecturer. In the mouth of students, it was also called the special class. After getting the news, they were so excited that they didn't fall asleep at midnight. It turned out that they only thought they followed an ordinary lecturer because of Su Li's age. They didn't expect that she was a special class lecturer. When they thought that when the administrator of the school came to recruit, other manservants were unwilling to go, they couldn't help laughing. Su Li got up very early to practice. At this moment, when she heard the shout outside the door, she calmly put on the clothes of the special class lecturer and walked out empty-handed. Seeing a small carriage and Xiaowu waiting beside the carriage, she nodded slightly. The special class school was a little far, and her clothes were too ostentatious. It was better to sit in the carriage. After a while, the horse stopped with a neigh. Su Li got off the station and came to the special class school. Feng Qingru said that it was called Nuanfeng Pavilion. There was only one school. There were no walls on all sides and all the windows could be used as walls. The structure was very delicate. It was made by Mo Jima, the first craftsman in the Qinghe province. Su Li told Xiaowu to wait outside the courtyard. Then she opened the door and walked in. In the next moment, four people looked at her. Su Li calmly walked to the teacher's table and glanced at the 4 people under the table. She recognized one of them. It was Gong Min. Gong Min saw Su Li and nodded slightly to say hello. Su Li nodded gently and turned her head. The first thing that came into her sight was the girl in red like fire. It was not that other people were not good enough, but the girl in the red dress was in the acquired 6th hurdle. She could even be equal to Feng Yuan's cultivation. As for the other 2 girls who seemed to be 17 or 18 years old, they were ordinary people. The Qinghe town is really a place of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Since there is a 15-year-old in the acquired 6th hurdle, there must be a senior in the inborn realm. I can't be careless. This thought flashed in Su Li's mind. She said loudly, "Nice to meet you. My name is Su Li. You must have heard of me. I will teach you embroidery from now on. Today, in the first class, I am not going to teach you anything, but to do a small test to test all of your embroidery level. Now, tell me your name. It is better if you can introduce yourself briefly." Su Li's words were simple and straightforward. A touch of appreciation flashed through the eyes of the girl in red. She said proudly, "Su Li, I heard that you are not from a good family, but I like your character very much. I will tell you that my name is Yan Hongxiu and I live in the satrap's mansion. Do you understand?" Yan Hongxiu said and curled her lips coldly. She looked at Su Li's reaction with a little sarcasm. How could such a silly girl be her teacher? The old woman was probably so confused that she couldn't think straight anymore. However, at this moment, an extremely cold and indifferent voice sounded. "Yan Hongxiu?" Su Li didn't seem to hear the latter half of the sentence and said lightly, "Pay attention to your tone in the future and respect your teacher in class. Since you are sitting here, you should scrupulously abide by etiquette." Please. Yan Hongxiu was dumbfounded. She guessed that Su Li would probably pretend to be calm and praise her. Or she would forget herself and cover up her panic in a hurry. But she didn't expect that Su Li's reaction would be so ruthless. Yes, it was heartless. It seemed that Su Li didn't hear that she was the satrap's daughter. No, she heard it but didn't care. Seeing that Yan Hongxiu was scolded, the 2 misses from rich families were slightly surprised. They immediately dispelled their thoughts and said obediently, "My name is Ran Ziden. My family is a businessman and quite rich. My name is Dong Xiaoxian. Like Miss Ran, my family is also a businessman." Gong Min saw that Yan Hongxiu was embarrassed and couldn't help but laugh in her heart. Then she said loudly, "My name is Gong Min, Lecturer Su. Why don't you start the test?" Su Li heard it and shook her head slightly. She frowned and said, "Senior Gong said that there are 5 people in the special class. There are only 4 of you. Where is the other one?" "Well, Ran Ziden and Dong Xiaoxian looked at each other and kept silent at the same time. Yen Hongxiu snorted coldly. Her expression clearly said that she wouldn't tell her even if she begged her. Gong Min said, "The other one is Jean Rulin. She is the pearl of the Jean family in the provincial city. She usually comes on time. I don't know why today, Jean Rulin?" Su Li murmured. Then she sat down and said leisurely, "Nothing can be accomplished without rules. My teacher is also a teacher. As long as all the students are not present in his class, he won't start the class. As his student, I naturally follow this tradition. Do you have any opinion?" When the 4 people below the stage heard this, they were shocked. What kind of logic was this? "Lecturer, you are simply dragging down the progress of our course. It is unreasonable." Yen Hongxiu immediately stood up and said angrily, "Did she think that she was Grandma Gong? How could she put on such airs in the first class?" "Yen Hongxiu, are you blaming me?" Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows. She tilted her head and smiled. "Why do you blame me? Shouldn't the 4 of you blame Jean Rulin? If it weren't for her, we could have started the course long ago. Your time is the time, but mine is. You are waiting for her, but so am I. Logically, shouldn't the 5 of us blame Jean Rulin?" Hearing Su Li's words, Yen Hongxiu was suddenly confused. Although she felt there was something strange in her words, she couldn't find any fault. Jean Rulin. Yen Hongxiu's beautiful eyes flashed with anger. She hated Jean Rulin very much in ordinary days. Jean Rulin was like a fly around her every day. She also treated Grandma Gong the same way, which was extremely disgusting. The other 3 people were a little older. They knew that Su Li meant to divert the trouble to Jean Rulin. But they couldn't help but feel a little disgusted with Jean Rulin. In Su Li's words, Jean Rulin obviously became a person without any sense of responsibility. Yen Hongxiu couldn't help but call. Suddenly, a clear voice of a little girl came from outside the door. "Miss, I am here. Go and call Jean Rulin. I want to see how arrogant she is. Even if I invite her, she won't come." Huan was shocked when she heard Yen Hongxiu was angry. She immediately obeyed and left. After an hour, a beautiful figure with a fragrant wind appeared in front of the door of the warm pavilion. It was quiet in the school, and the atmosphere was very dignified. Jean Rulin coughed and walked in with small steps. She sat next to Yen Hongxiu and said with kindness and expectation, "Sister Hongxiu, why do you call me here?" Jean Rulin was still surprised. She didn't expect that Yen Hongxiu would suddenly come to her. Was the relationship between her and Yen Hongxiu going further? This girl had always ignored her in the past. "Who is your sister?" Yen Hongxiu was annoyed when she heard Jean Rulin's address. She said, "Do you know that there is a class today? Why don't you come?" Jean Rulin's smile on her face was slightly stiff. She soon recovered and said, "Didn't you say that the lecturer was changed? She is still a little girl. I happen to have an important elder to receive at home, so I didn't come. But when I saw Huan, I immediately rushed over." Jean Rulin's words were full of disdain. It seemed that she didn't see Su Li sitting at the teacher's desk and chatted with Yen Hongxiu as if nothing had happened. Yen Hongxiu instantly laughed out of anger and didn't know how to explain. But at this time, Su Li said, "You mean that you don't want to come as long as it is my class? Is that right, Jean Rulin?" Jean Rulin stopped smiling and recovered the calm look of a lady from a respectable family. She turned around and said with a smile, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Rulin, I didn't see Lecturer Su here. I didn't mean that just now. But an important elder suddenly came to visit at home." "So you mean," Su Li said evilly, "the special course of the Qinghe Girls' School is not as important as your elder?" Jean Rulin's face was slightly pale. She waved her hand repeatedly and said, "I didn't mean that." "Then what do you mean, huh? Do you look down on the lecturer of the Qinghe Girls' School?" Su Li suddenly raised her tone and the pressure was greatly increased. Jean Rulin was so scared that she turned pale and almost cried. "I was wrong, Lecturer Su. I spoke rudely just now. Please punish me, lecturer." Jean Rulin knelt down and apologized again and again. She had wanted to take advantage of Su Li verbally, but she didn't expect that she was defeated by Su Li in a second. She didn't even know why she was afraid and why she lost. The other 4 people were also shocked. Jean Rulin was the pearl of the Jean family. How could she be scared by Su Li's words? Yen Hongxiu was at a loss. It seemed that she didn't understand why Jean Rulin, who was arrogant just now, suddenly became like this. In this case, since it's your first offense, I won't pursue it anymore. Go back to your seat and start the test. Su Li waved her sleeves. Jean Rulin immediately felt that she was pardoned. She sat back to her seat obediently, but her hands were slightly trembling. Su Li noticed this detail and slightly raised the corner of her mouth. The Jean family, it was really a long time. The first test is to test the basic needlework. You are limited to embroider an osmanthus flower with basic needlework in half an hour. Su Li said lightly, I will also join you. Let's get started. The 5 people slightly stared at the words. They didn't dare to delay and immediately began to embroider. This test was still a little difficult for them. But if they could perform exceptionally, they should be able to complete it. But they didn't know how long it would take Su Li. The whole warm room became quiet. Only the action of threading the needle was repeated. Even the sound of opening the needle box became a little harsh. Gong Min was embroidering the 3rd petal attentively. Suddenly, a white and tender hand appeared in her eyes and gently held her hand. Try to change the angle of half an inch and embroider from here. Su Li's voice slowly came into her ears. Gong Min was a little calm and immediately carried out Su Li's order without hesitation. She was the only student who had seen Su Li's embroidery. Naturally, she knew that Su Li's embroidery skills were even better than her grandmother's. After changing the angle, Gong Min found that her arm was much more comfortable, and the petals seemed to become more flexible, not as rigid as before. Oh no, Lecturer Su is really talented and knowledgeable. Gong Min secretly praised. Suddenly, she realized that Su Li appeared beside her at this time. She couldn't help but look up. Sure enough, she saw that the embroidery board on the teacher's desk had been erected. There seemed to be an osmanthus flower just picked from the tree on it. Let's not talk about Gong Min's reaction. At this moment, Su Li walked to Yen Hongxiu. When she saw what Yen Hongxiu was embroidering, she suddenly looked strange. What was this? Osmanthus flower? She looked like a ball of tofu dregs. Why is the needle so fragile? It's almost broken. It's so troublesome, Yen Hongxiu whispered with a bitter face. Suddenly, she noticed that there was a sound of breathing beside her. She immediately looked up and saw a pair of eyes full of indescribable feelings. Yen Hongxiu's little face immediately turned red. You are not allowed to see it. Yen Hongxiu hurriedly covered the embroidery board and said, Aren't you embroidering with us? What are you doing here? Do you want to learn secretly? Chapter 84. Yen Hongxiu smiled when she saw the flower on the embroidery board on the teacher's desk. She immediately came over and buckled the embroidery board. She immediately stood up and ran to the embroidery board. She said complacently in her heart, You still want to lie to me. It is obviously a real flower. Now the osmanthus is in full bloom. She strode forward and stretched out her hand over the surface of the embroidery board. But she grasped nothing. No! Yen Hongxiu was stunned. She didn't believe it and rubbed the surface of the embroidery board. She felt a slight bulge. The osmanthus was embroidered. It's the same as the real one. Yen Hongxiu cried out involuntarily. She turned around and saw Su Li was looking at her embroidery board. She was immediately annoyed. She turned back and grabbed the embroidery board with one hand. She said with a crying tone, You are not allowed to look at it. Su Li still looked calm and didn't show any weakness. She came closer and whispered, What? You can't stand being surpassed by your peers and feel defeated? You thought you were the best in the world. Even if you were not the best, you would be said to be the best. Are you satisfied with this? Su Li's words were like a cold knife stabbing into her chest. Yen Hongxiu's eyes were slightly red. She was so angry that her whole body was trembling slightly. Su Li was too much. What? You can't accept the fact that I told you the truth? Su Li smiled and said softly, there is no perfect person in this world. Everyone will fail. If you can't stand failure, then you don't need to live. Yan Hongxiu looked at Su Li in a daze, as if the world in front of her was broken by Su Li. She held back the tears in her eyes and snorted, Su Li, don't think that you are great because you know a little embroidery. I will be a female general in the future. Embroidery is nothing to me. Su Li smiled more and said, you can't even do embroidery well. How can you be a female general? Do you think you can be arrogant because you have a little talent in martial arts? What some people say is what you like to hear. But it is poison. You are about to be poisoned, but you feel good about yourself. You are really hopeless. Yan Hongxiu was speechless. She found that she was no match for Su Li in eloquence. She felt more frustrated. At this time, Su Li came over and pointed at Yan Hongxiu's heart. When you can practice here well, no matter what you can do better than now. This sentence was different from the previous sarcasm. It was like a breeze blowing through Yan Hongxiu's heart. She vaguely remembered that her father had said similar words, but she was still young at that time and didn't understand what it meant. Today, stimulated by Su Li, she seemed to understand a little bit. This lecturer? Lecturer Su, Yan Hongxiu snorted and sat down again. She took her embroidery board and looked at it. Finally, she plucked up her courage and put it on the table. I won't run away anymore. Yan Hongxiu's eyes were full of fighting spirit as if she had changed into another person. Before long, the incense burner burned out. Half an hour had passed. Su Li clapped her hands and motioned everyone to stop. Gong Min stopped and a trace of pity flashed in her eyes. She didn't embroider the last branch. However, with Su Li's guidance, she had a lot of inspiration in embroidering flowers with basic needlework today. It was enough for her embroidery skills to make a small step forward. Ran Ziden and Dong Xiaoxian didn't finish embroidering either. They still needed half a branch and 2 leaves. Compared with Gong Min, their embroidery skills were still a little worse. Jean Rulin put down the needle and thread at the same time, but her eyes were full of confidence. She was the first to present the embroidery board. She was the only one who finished embroidery. I didn't expect that even Gong Min didn't finish embroidery. Does it mean that my embroidery skills have surpassed hers and I have become the first in the class? Jean Rulin was complacent. She looked up and saw a pair of cold eyes. You finished embroidery. Do you think you are very good? Su Li's words were like cold water poured over her head. Jean Rulin suddenly woke up and shook her head quickly. Then she saw the embroidery on the embroidery board. Really? She couldn't help but grab it, but just like Yan Hongxiu, she grabbed nothing. It is embroidery. Jean Rulin was so shocked that she couldn't compare with Su Li anymore. The gap was too big. At this time, the other 4 people also presented the embroidery boards in turn and waited for Su Li's comments. Su Li picked up Ran Ziden's embroidery board first. She glanced at it and said, the basic skills are solid, but the stitches are still superficial. You need to carve the details well. The speed is not up to the standard of the top embroidery artificer, and the pattern is too rigid. It lacks authenticity. It's better to enjoy flowers in your spare time. Every word of Su Li hit the nail on the head. Ran Ziden was ashamed and couldn't help but have the true reverence for Su Li that only a teacher and a student had. Then it was Dong Xiaoshuan's turn. She naturally made a sharp comment. The third one was Yan Hongxiu's turn. She plucked up her courage and stood in front of Su Li. She was ready to be scolded. But Su Li just glanced at her lightly and said, there is still room for improvement in embroidery skills. After class, take Gong Min's embroidery board back to practice. Yan Hongxiu waited for a long time, but she was stunned when she saw Su Li pick up Gong Min's embroidery board. That was it? Didn't she scold others? Yan Hongxiu stood aside with her embroidery board. She was still confused. Since she came to the special class, it was the first time for her to be so excited. Seeing Gong Min's embroidery board, Su Li finally smiled and said, very good. You are developing in the ideal direction. I have pointed out a direction for you. If you can use it to reach a higher realm, it will be the best. Gong Min took a deep breath and couldn't help but say excitedly, "Thank you, lecturer. I've been stuck for a long time. Grandma can't help it. I must tell her the good news later." Su Li smiled and nodded. Gong Min didn't take the embroidery board and stood aside. Jean Rulin took a deep breath. Finally, it was her turn. Gong Min didn't finish the embroidery, but she was praised. If she finished, then, at this time, the 5 people didn't notice. They didn't know when they began to care about Su Li's comments. In just one class, the relationship between Su Li and the 5 people completed an amazing change from peers to teachers and students. Su Li slowly picked up Jean Rulin's embroidery board and said, "The speed is good, and the stitches are smooth. It means a top embroidery artificer." Hearing this, Jean Rulin was happy. But Su Li's voice suddenly became cold. "However, you only focus on showing off your skills and completely ignore the essence of embroidery. Let me ask you, what is the highest realm that an embroidery artificer should pursue?" Jean Rulin was shocked and replied without thinking, "Of course, it is the top embroidery method like the workshop owner." Advanced embroidery method. I heard that the lecturer knows how to use flower needle. Why don't you teach us? Oh. Su Li sneered and said, "Do you think the most important thing for an embroidery artificer is the status? Do you want to be an embroidery artificer just for fame and fortune?" Of course not. Jean Rulin's face was livid. At this moment, she had recovered from the shock. Although she didn't understand why she was so scared just now, it didn't prevent her from refuting confidently, "The embroidery method of the workshop owner is naturally the best, and it is also what every embroidery artificer pursues. What's wrong with what I said? What if I ask you to put aside the embroidery workshop?" Su Li said lightly, "What else can you say?" Jean Rulin was dumbfounded. In addition to the skills and embroidery workshop that she had mastered, what else could she say? These 2 ways were blocked by Su Li. "It seems that you don't have the potential to be a top embroidery artificer for the time being." Su Li was full of disappointment and shook her head slightly. "That's all for today's class. You can go now." Wait. Jean Rulin's eyes were full of anger and her expression was slightly distorted. She sneered and said, "You are not the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. How can you say that I am not a top embroidery artificer? Let me tell you, I have already received the examination application of the embroidery workshop. When the workshop owner goes to the embroidery workshop tomorrow, I can immediately get the embroidery method of the top embroidery artificer. I want to see what you will say about me in the next class." Then, Jean Rulin left angrily, leaving the other 4 people with different expressions. Su Li sat at the teaching desk and propped up half of her cheek. After a while, she suddenly asked, "Gong Min, don't other people know about your grandma's things?" Gong Min couldn't hold it anymore and couldn't help laughing. "Yes. Except for Grandma, only Sister Qingru and I know it." Well, no wonder. Su Li's meaningful words made Yen Hongxiu's heart itch. She couldn't help but pull Gong Min's sleeve and asked in a low voice, "No wonder what?" Gong Min glanced at Su Li. Seeing that Su Li didn't stop her, she immediately smiled and said, "Grandma also gave the position of the workshop owner to lecturer Su, so Jean Rulin." Yen Hongxiu was shocked. She immediately thought of what Jean Rulin said before and couldn't help giggling. Ran Ziden and Dong Xiaoxian also looked strange. They thought that Jean Rulin seemed to be too unlucky. After the 4 people left, Su Li stared at the empty school for a while. Then, she got on Xiaowu's carriage and went to Ning Yunji's yard. Ning Yunji saw that Su Li came here without changing her clothes. He felt comforted. Although Su Li was young now, she had a respected status. But her attitude towards these old guys didn't change at all. This time, Su Li and Ning Yunji tacitly didn't mention the name of Qi Xianqing. They chatted casually and time passed quickly. The pot of tea brewed by Ning Qing was also drunk. "Aunt Ning's tea is really delicious. It's late. Su Li will come to visit next time." After saying goodbye, Su Li left lightly. Ning Qing was full of warmth. She couldn't help but say, "This girl is too sweet. I feel embarrassed because of her praise. Alas, if Su Li is my daughter, how nice it would be." Ning Yunji couldn't help but snort and said, "Why did you refuse the marriage that year?" Ning Yunji felt something was wrong, but he saw that Ning Qing's face was full of frost. She turned around and left without saying anything. "My teapot is empty, Qing." Seeing that his daughter walked away without looking back, Ning Yunji couldn't help but slap himself. "Why can't I control my mouth?" When Su Li returned to her courtyard, it was already dark. "Miss, are you going out tonight?" After the last incident, Mammy Li had known a lot of Su Li's secrets. Su Li nodded slightly and said, "If someone asks, just say that I am going to the town to observe the embroidery workshop." "I will." "Don't worry, Mississippi." After saying goodbye to Mammy Li, Su Li changed into casual clothes and left the school gate. She went all the way to the embroidery workshop in the Qinghe town and booked a room in an inn. Then she jumped out of the back window of the room and disappeared into the night. At this moment, beside the rather lively street, a half-story building was being built in full swing. The materials used were the best in the restaurant. This scene had been maintained for a whole 7 days, causing many passers-by to talk about it. Su Huanli was one of them. "I didn't expect that it was really demolished and rebuilt." Su Huanli was distressed. Although the Baiwei building didn't collapse with these two shops, he still felt that he suffered a great loss. If Su Li gained a firm foothold in the Qinghe town and used this shop to open a branch of the Baiwei building, how good it would be. Unfortunately, the other 3 shops were compensated to the Yang clan. The Su clan didn't even have a piece of land in Qinghe town. Chapter 85. In the spacious and bright adytum under the restaurant, Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning were discussing the drawings in a low voice. Suddenly, Fang Yuan's ears moved slightly. The next moment he flashed to the door of the adytum with vigilance. When Chu Qingning was about to take action, the door of the adytum was still pushed open slowly. Su Li, who wore a black night suit, walked in calmly. When she saw Fang Yuan at the door, she stopped as if she was a little frightened. Seeing Su Li, Fang Yuan was slightly relieved and said, "Why didn't you tell me that you came here? How did you come down? Don't forget who drew the drawings." Su Li chuckled and sat at the table. She asked, "How is your progress these days?" Chu Qingning smiled and came over. "Su Li, we are not lazy. You see, the adytum on the first underground floor has been built. Even the first floor has been built half. It has only been 7 days. Isn't it good?" Su Li nodded slightly and said, "I was also surprised when I came here. I didn't expect that the first underground floor had been built. In this case, you can start to transport the things of the yard here. By the way, how many taels of silver do you have?" Chu Qingning felt aggrieved and said, "Su Li, you said that you should build the restaurant as soon as possible. So, I discussed with Fang Yuan and recruited double helpers. Naturally, the expenses are high. It costs us 50,000 taels of silver to build the first floor. Don't worry. I will leave the remaining 200,000 taels of silver to you. Open the restaurant as soon as possible, so that our silver won't be like water without a source." Su Li took out the rest of the banknotes without blinking her eyes. Chu Qingning put them away and couldn't help but be shocked. Su Li was really bold. Wasn't she afraid that the business would fail? "Have you thought about the name of the restaurant?" Fang Yuan, who had been listening quietly, suddenly asked. The restaurant was about to be built with Su Li's money. Naturally, Su Li should name it. "I have thought about it for a long time. The name of the restaurant is Lin Li Building." Su Li smiled and said. A ray of light flashed in her eyes. Fang Yuan was slightly stunned and nodded without saying anything. "Lin Li? Ling Li?" The atmosphere suddenly became a little dull. Seeing this, Chu Qingning immediately changed the topic and said, "By the way, what about those craftsmen? Since you've built an underground chamber, you naturally can't let anyone know about it. However, those craftsmen have all seen the blueprints. Isn't this a waste of effort?" Su Li smiled and took out a white porcelain bottle and put it on the stone table. "When the time comes, feed it to all the craftsmen, no matter what." Fang Yuan's face darkened slightly, and Chu Qingning's face changed immediately. He pointed to the bottle on the table and said, This is not appropriate, right? Those people." Su Li smiled sweetly. She opened the bottle and shook it. What do you think this is? Poison to the intestines? If I really poisoned all of them to death, would I still need to open this shop? Chu Qingning was stunned. He scratched his head in embarrassment and said, I was wrong. What's inside? Make them forget something. The more they eat, the more they forget. You have to pay attention to the dosage when you put it in. It's best to control the memory within 2 months. Do you know? Su Li warned him carefully. Chu Qingning couldn't help but marvel in his heart. Why did Su Li have all kinds of strange things? Even Nanjiang country, which was famous for its strange poisonous insects, was not as interesting as Su Li's poison. Where did she learn the poison skill? Fang Yuan, can you recognize it? After Su Li left, Chu Qingning couldn't help but ask. Fang Yuan shook his head and said, if it's a well-known poison skill, how can there be so many magical recipes? Since Su Li doesn't say it, we can't ask. Chu Qingning rubbed his chin and immediately smiled. It's so interesting to follow Su Li. Fang Yuan glanced at him expressionlessly. Then he looked at Fang Ling, who was busy in the chamber, and his eyes softened. Back in the inn, Su Li carefully checked the traces of the house to make sure that no one had been here. Then she sat down at ease and began the day's practice. Although she didn't have the assistance of elixirs, her physique was extremely suitable for the Ghost Valley meditation direction. She had quietly practiced the Ghost Valley meditation direction to the 7th hurdle. Her practice speed was more than twice as fast as that of the 5th hurdle. From the Desu town to the Qinghe province, there were many troubles, but her cultivation was steadily improving. She had stepped into the peak of the inborn 1st hurdle and was only a step away from the inborn 2nd hurdle. Su Li didn't expect such a speed. The practice method and personal experience of this life were much better than that of the previous life. She didn't know how far she could go with the complete Ghost Valley meditation direction. Nothing happened that night. The next morning, Su Li got up early and went downstairs to have breakfast. Then she walked to the embroidery workshop that had just opened. There were countless people who came to the embroidery order every day. The door was open and no one was refused. Su Li didn't show anyone her identity and easily got in. At the moment when Su Li disappeared in the door of the embroidery workshop, Yan Hongxiu and the maid Huan also appeared in front of the door with their faces tightly covered. Miss, how did you run out? Don't you have a literature class today? Yan Hongxiu was peeping at the door. When she heard Huan's words, she immediately said impatiently, Oh, I saw old Ning had dark circles under his eyes, so I gave him some medicine and let him have a good sleep. Don't say anything. Hurry up and go in. I'm waiting to see a good show. Yan Hongxiu's dress was really a little conspicuous. As long as people looked carefully, they could still recognize Yan Hongxiu. The guard of the embroidery workshop held back his laughter and blushed. He pretended not to see Yan Hongxiu and let her go in. When Su Li walked into the hall of the embroidery workshop, she was immediately overwhelmed by the hustle and bustle. As far as she could see, there were businessmen holding bank notes and orders. They crowded in front of the table for accepting embroidery orders and rushed forward desperately. Ordinary embroidery was not valuable. But the fine embroidery produced by the embroidery workshop or the work embroidered by the top embroidery artificer was not only popular in the country, but also sold at a high price if it could be transported to other countries. Therefore, the business of the embroidery workshop was full every day. The situation in the hall would continue from morning to evening. Su Li glanced at it and no longer paid attention to it. She turned around and stopped a supervisor. She showed the nameplate of the top embroidery artificer. The supervisor's expression immediately changed slightly. He took Su Li to the back hall. When they entered the back hall of the embroidery workshop, the hustle and bustle became smaller and smaller. When the supervisor took her to the embroidery room, the hustle and bustle had completely disappeared and was replaced by silence. Lady, I'm not familiar with you. I don't know which embroidery artificer you are. Could you tell me? I can lead the way. The supervisor who took Su Li here was middle-aged. He thought Su Li was too young, but he didn't dare to cross the line. The nameplate of the top embroidery artificer couldn't be faked. Even if she took the nameplate of her parents, he wouldn't stop her. The top embroidery artificer was highly respected in the embroidery workshop. As a small official, he couldn't defend her. "I don't know where my embroidery room is," Su Li said. The supervisor thought she was right and said, "In this case, miss, why don't you go to the central hall and wait for your elders? It is the reception hall of the workshop owner. It happens that the new workshop owner will come to inspect today. If you are lucky, you can meet her." Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows and didn't expose him. She said, "Let's go to the central hall." The supervisor was relieved when he heard that. If the miss was unreasonable, it would be difficult for him to deal with her. Walking from the back hall to the central hall, Su Li and the supervisor met many embroidery artificers who passed by hurriedly with embroidery boards in their arms. Many of them pointed at Su Li. Obviously, they were curious. Su Li remained calm. The supervisor was amazed by her calm temperament at such a young age. At the same time, he was more and more curious about which descendant of the top embroidery artificer she was. The name of the embroidery artificer was on the back of the nameplate. He just saw the surface of the nameplate and didn't dare to let Su Li turn it over for him. "Miss, we have arrived at the central hall." The supervisor stopped and pointed to an open room in the backyard. Su Li looked over and immediately saw many acquaintances. She slightly raised the corner of her mouth and stepped into the room before the supervisor continued to lead the way. When the supervisor saw the people in the room, his face changed immediately. He knew something was wrong. But when he thought of Su Li's identity, he braced himself and followed her in. Jean Ruolin was trying to get close to Yen Hongxiu, who was depressed. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. She turned around and saw the person. Her face changed immediately. She said, "Why are you here? Who allowed you to come in?" Then, a sharp light flashed in her eyes, and her sight fell on the steward behind Su Li. Her exasperated voice instantly broke through the roof of the central hall. "Gao Dehai, how dare you? She is not a member of the embroidery workshop. How dare you bring an outsider in?" Gao Dehai panicked when he heard that. He knew Jean Ruolin. She was the daughter of the Jean family. She was unruly and temperamental. If he fell into the hands of this woman, he would definitely end miserably. Gao Dehai didn't say anything. Su Li gently stepped forward and said with a smile, "Jean Ruolin, I haven't seen you for a day. Your arrogance has skyrocketed. It seems like you don't take my words to heart at all." Jean Ruolin sneered and said, "Su Li, where do you think this is? This is not your warm room, but the embroidery workshop of the Qinghe province. You break in so openly. Be careful that you will be arrested by the government and be punished." Before Jean Ruolin finished her words, Yen Hongxiu laughed behind her and said, "Jean Ruolin, you are really arrogant. I am not a member of the embroidery workshop. Why don't you punish me?" Jean Ruolin's expression froze. She turned around and saw Yen Hongxiu with a dangerous smile. She immediately recovered her friendly expression and said, "Miss Hongxiu, in the Qinghe town, no one dares to arrest you and put you in jail. Su Li is just a commoner. How can she compare with you?" Then, Jean Ruolin turned around and her face instantly became fierce. She said, "Gao Dehai, what are you doing? Go and report it to the government." Gao Dehai was stunned. Looking at Su Li's delicate and innocent appearance, he hesitated for a long time and didn't move. Seeing his reaction, Jean Ruolin was about to go crazy instantly and said, "Guards! You are a group of cowards. Don't you dare to arrest a commoner who breaks into the embroidery workshop?" As soon as she finished her words, a lot of observant stewards rushed out and were about to catch Su Li. Yen Hongxiu saw that the situation was not good. She immediately stood up and shouted, "Stop!" The title of the satrap's daughter was naturally more important than that of Jean Ruolin. The stewards immediately stopped and stood aside. Jean Ruolin was stunned. She couldn't figure out why Yen Hongxiu stopped them. She hated Su Li to ride roughshod over her. At this time, Su Li finally moved. She stepped out and gradually approached Jean Ruolin. She opened her red lips. "Jean Ruolin, you keep saying report to the government and punish. Does this embroidery workshop belong to you? You overstep your authority. Aren't you afraid that the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop will complain? Jean Rulin immediately laughed and said sarcastically, "Who do you think you are? Can the workshop owner speak for you? Besides, I am also thinking for the embroidery workshop. Even if the workshop owner knows it, she will praise me for doing a good job." No. If the workshop owner knows it, she will definitely not say so. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.